Before I start reading this chapter, I might want to check quickly that this is actually... No, never mind. I'll read a little bit of this, and then I'll check. And if it's not successfully live, I'll just have to start a new stream. I'm having some really weird errors with my computer right now, and I don't understand it. Okay, it stopped. Chapter 15. Poison. No. One unfortunate side effect of Ava's banishment, and the risk that she might try to take revenge, was the towering guard that was now with me everywhere I went. Measuring in at 6.5 feet tall, he was the large blonde I'd spotted at the ball back in September. He walked with a limp that didn't seem to affect his speech. Didn't affect his speed. And I was too afraid to ask how he'd gotten it. While he didn't say much, Calliope called him Nicholas, and he was nice enough for a guy who could easily kill me with his pinky. I was never alone anymore. When Nicholas wasn't with me, Sorry. I restarted my computer, and after I restarted it, all kinds of things just keep popping up without me wanting them to. And I keep closing them. And that too. Um, it's trying to close or minimize my screen as well. Yeah, it just minimized my screen again. I don't know why this is happening. I was too afraid to ask how he'd gotten it. While he didn't say much, Calliope called him Nicholas, and he was nice enough for a guy who could easily kill me with his pinky. I was never alone anymore. When Nicholas wasn't with me, Henry was, and he had more guards stationed outside my room while I slept. They were only for show. After Christmas Eve, Henry spent every night with me, a complete turnaround from how he'd acted before Christmas. It was as if I'd broken through an invisible barrier, and now instead of avoiding me and hoping I'd keep myself alive, he seemed determined to do the job for me. Nothing ever happened in the evening except for the occasional kiss or a brush of the hand in my hair, and he never pushed for anything more. I was simply grateful for the company, and the more I saw of his human side, the more I hoped I was enough to make him want to stay. It wasn't a charade. I wasn't returning his kisses to fool him into thinking I cared about him, or because I pitied him. I was falling for him, a little more every day. And even though a very large part of me knew that this was a bad idea, there was no guarantee I would pass, and nothing that gave me reason to think that any kind of relationship would last more than the remainder of winter. But if I did somehow miraculously succeed, Henry would need a reason to stay, and I would be that reason. So for the first time in my life, I shoved aside the worries and the doubts, and I let my barriers down. The afternoons were a burden now, a time I had to endure in order to get to the evenings we spent together, and every time I saw him, no matter how short a time he'd been away, my heart raced. Now that I had survived Christmas, I dared to hope, and with that hope came possibilities. When I woke up before him, I watched him sleep as the early morning rays filtered through the curtains, and I tried to picture waking up to him like this for the rest of eternity. It was strange to think that if the impossible happened and I managed to pass the test without getting myself killed, he would be my future. My entire future, with no threat of death lurking around the corner any longer, my husband. The word was foreign to my thoughts, let alone on my tongue, and I was sure I'd never get used to the idea, but as much as I resisted it, I was too young, too alone, not even remotely ready for that sort of life. I began to see that it wouldn't be so bad. Henry was broken, but so was I, and spending my life with him was hardly the hell I thought it would be in the weeks after he'd saved Ava's life. And in time, maybe he would be able to fix each other. I could give him what he needed, a friend, a wife, a queen. In return, we could be my family. As the days until spring grew fewer, my dreams with my mother grew more solemn. Every moment was precious, but most of the time I had no idea what to say. We walked hand in hand through the park most days, and she led the conversation as we talked about everything and nothing. She told me every night how proud she was of me, how much she loved me, and how bad she wanted for me to be happy without her, to not need her to continue as Henry needed me. Most of the time I had no idea what to say. We walked hand in hand through the park most days, and she led the conversation as we talked. I keep getting these co-pilot pop-ups, and I don't understand it. I keep exiting them, and they keep coming back in, and I don't know why. And it keeps trying to minimize my window. We walked hand in hand through the park most days, and she led the conversation as we talked about everything and nothing. She told me how every night how proud she was of me, how much she loved me, and how badly she wanted for me to happen without her, to not need her to continue as Henry needed me. But the most I could give her in return was a tight nod and a squeeze of the hand. Things I couldn't say gathered in my throat, forming a knot I could never swallow. As the days passed and my chances to tell her dwindled, I knew I would have to force them out eventually, but not yet. As long as there was a tomorrow in the manor, I could pretend there was still a hope she would never have to die. The closer I got to Henry, the further removed from the real world. Oh gosh. Oh gosh, oh gosh. Now I was trying to open up Word. As the days passed and my chances to tell her dwindled, I knew I would have to force them out eventually. But not yet. As long as there was tomorrow in the manor, I could pretend there was still a hope she would never have to die. The closer I got to Henry, the further removed from the real world I became, even though it was beginning to feel like I would never go back, like those 6 months would somehow find a way to stretch into eternity. I knew they wouldn't. There was an end, and we rapidly were approaching it. Despite Henry's company and constantly being shadowed, I was lonely. Ella spent all of her time with Theo now, while Calliope stayed with me when Henry wasn't there. Even she seemed subdued after the incident at Christmas. Even though James was the enemy now, I thought about him often. I couldn't have been fake. Our friendship, and I missed being able to miss him without feeling angry. He wasn't the one trying to kill me, I was sure of it now, and something about knowing he was on my side, even though I wasn't on his, was comforting. I missed Ava most of all. Every time I came across something I wanted to show her or thought of something I wanted to tell her, it took me a few seconds before I remembered that I would never see her again, at least not as friends. Occasionally I caught glimpses of her leaving a room as I entered, or at the other end of a hallway I turned down, but she was never there for more than a moment. Henry never made me talk about the pain and guilt I felt at separation, even though it sometimes kept me up at night. He let me work my way through it on my own, and I wasn't sure if I were grateful or resentful. Knowing that Ava must have felt badly as I did only made me feel worse. Maybe she wasn't the best friend in the world, and maybe she was a little too selfish sometimes, but I wasn't perfect either. With each day that passed, I regretted my judgment more and more. Ava was allowed to make mistakes, we all were, and what gave me the right to punish her for them when all she'd been trying to do was make the loneliness a little easier to bear? To try and fill the empty hours, I spent more and more time in stables with Philip. It was quiet, and he didn't press for conversation. He seemed to understand what I was going through, and he offered to let me spend as much time with the horses as I wanted. It was a generous offer, considering how protective he was of them, but it wasn't enough to make me forget what I was losing. It was near the end of January when one afternoon Henry found me in the garden, wrapped in a cloak and kneeling next to a dormant, snow-covered rose bush. The memory of how I'd gotten there was hazy at best, but I didn't particularly care. Where was I? Once Irene had told me the date in the middle of our tutoring session, everything had become fuzzy, and it was Henry's voice that brought me crashing back down to reality. Kate, dressed in heavy black cloak. He stood a few feet away, sticking out like a sore thumb against the snow. I didn't look up. It's my mother's last birthday. He stood still. Part of me wanted him to keep his distance, but a much more insistent part wished he knew me well enough to know when I desperately needed a hug. She always hated being born in January, I continued, my voice blank as I stared at the lifeless plant in front of me. Said she never felt like celebrating when there weren't any flowers, and all the trees were dead. Sleeping, said Henry. The trees are only sleeping. They will return when the time is right. My mother won't. I sat down heavily on the snow, not caring if my jeans got wet. We've been celebrating her last birthday ever since she was diagnosed. This time it's really it. I'm sorry. He sat down beside me and wrapped his arm around me, and the warmth from his body stopped mine from becoming numb. Is there anything I can do? I shook my head. I don't know what I'm going to do without her. Henry was silent for a long moment, and when he did speak, his voice sounded distant. May I show you something? What sort of something? Close your eyes. Fairly certain of what was about to happen, I obliged, expecting the change in climate. Instead of going from the cold outdoors to the warm indoors, however, I felt sunshine on my face and a warm breeze. We were still outside. When I opened my eyes, half expecting to still be in the garden, I had to steady myself against Henry as I looked around. We were standing in the middle of Central Park on a summer day, exactly as my mother and I did in my dreams, except now the park was empty. My mother was nowhere in sight. Henry? I said uncertainly, looking around. The lake was nearby, and I heard the strains of a familiar song being played somewhere in the distance, but we were alone. What are we doing in New York? We are not in New York. He sounded wistful. I inched closer to him, both afraid and fascinated by this place. This is your afterlife. I stared at him, his words taking several seconds to settle properly in my mind. You mean this is your corner of the underworld. He raised an eyebrow at my expression. Do not worry, it is only temporary. I wanted you to see it. Wildly, I looked around, hoping my mother would appear, but it was just us. Why? I wanted you to see it, so you would know. He stopped, but he didn't need to finish for me to understand what he wasn't saying. He wanted to show me where I would go when I died. My stomach twisted into knots, and I glared at an unoffending patch of grass. So he wasn't really fighting after all. But he continued, his eyes lowered to the ground. I am showing you so you will have some first-hand experience if you pass the tests. A lie, but I tried to believe it. Once you become immortal, when you are here, the underworld will take on the shape of the mortal sees it. Several seconds passed, and he added in a quieter voice, I also wish to know you will be the content of the council does not rule in your favor. My favor, not his, not ours. I whirled around to face him. Why are you letting them walk all over you like this? The council, your family, whatever they are? If you think I'm good enough, then why don't you tell them to put a sock in it and respect your decision? Henry's expression was unreadable. I'm not omnipotent, he said, taking a cautious step toward me. I didn't move away. It is within the council's power to make those sort of decisions, not mine. But you could at least try, and I don't see you doing much of that lately, I snapped. He flinched, but I kept going. Are you a member of the council? Yes and no. He gestured for me to sit down on the grass, but I refused, standing with my arms crossed. I spent most of the time separate from them. When they desire my input, or when it is a decision that directly affects my duties, I join them, but their decisions deal with the world of the living. That is not my realm. So why don't you tell them to shove it and get this whole thing over with? If they rule over the living and you're not living, why do they get to say whether or not you're doing a good job? Henry gazed off into the distance toward the sparkling lake. They are the ones who are able to grant your immortality, not I. Perhaps, in the beginning, they would have trusted me with this decision, but the mistakes I made with Persephone have colored the council's opinion of my judgments. I gritted my teeth at the mention of Persephone, and hatred gnawed at my insides. Even if it was his actions that caused her not to love him, she was the one who'd hurt him. Can I ask you something? He made a wordless sound in the back of his throat, and I took that as a yes. I settled on the grass beside him. Why did you kidnap Persephone? He pulled away enough to look me in the eye, and the pain on his face made me regret my question. I'm sorry, I said quickly. You don't have to tell me if you don't want. No, no, he shook his head. I'm not angry. I am only trying to understand how it is possible that the truth of the matter could have gotten so lost in time. I waited for him to continue, ignoring the dampness of the grass that was starting to seep through my jeans. He looked pensive, as if he were looking for the exact way to tell me something he didn't often get to say. I did not kidnap her, he finally said. It was an arranged marriage that she accepted, as her parents were the ones who set it up. I hesitated, trying to remember the details of the mythology I learned. Zeus and Demeter? Very good. His smile didn't reach his eyes. You must have figured out by now that my family is a strange one. We call ourselves brothers and sisters, but in truth we are not. We have simply been together for so long that the words to describe the bond we have do not exist. Family is the only comparison we can draw, though it is a weak one. Ella told me you weren't actually siblings. Did she? He seemed darkly amused by this. We all have the same creator, but we are not strictly related. In fact, my brother, who is of course not actually my brother, is married to my sister, and their son is married to our other sister as well. Making a face, I tried to wrap my mind around that. Not related, right? Not even remotely. He pressed his lips to my forehead, a silent apology. Or maybe he was trying to alleviate my anger. Persephone's mother is my favorite sister, and she was the one to suggest the match. Persephone and I got along well when we saw each other, and her mother insisted she wanted us both to be happy. While I was used to being alone, I enjoyed the prospect of spending so much time with Persephone. When she didn't object, things were finalized and she became my wife. Wife, what would I be to him if I succeeded? As often as I thought of what a future with Henry might bring, the idea of being his wife, anyone's wife, still hadn't settled well with me. Maybe it was because I was 18, or maybe it was because my mother had never married, but I couldn't imagine it. Then again, maybe that was a good thing. No expectations, and my desire to be married wasn't stronger than my desire to be with Henry, like I suspected Persephone's might have been. She helped me rule, he continued, doing as you will hopefully be doing soon enough. But she was young when we married, and he averted his eyes. Eventually she saw me as her captor rather than her husband. She resented me greatly. And while in the beginning she was fond of me, I do not believe she ever loved me, not like I love her. Love, not loved. I exhaled. History takes her side, of course, and I have my suspicions about that, but in truth I never forced her into a marriage. I love her dearly, and it was agony for me to see her so miserable. After several millennia she fell in love with a mortal, and chose to give up her immortality for him and let her go. And I let her go. It hurt a great deal, but I knew it would hurt me more if I made her stay. I was silent for the space of several heartbeats as I digested what he was telling me. Unrequited love was one thing, but spending an incomprehensible amount of time in that sort of pain, I couldn't imagine it. I didn't even want to try. I'm sorry, I said, my anger dissipating as I wished there was something else to say. Don't be. Henry's lips curled up into a smile that helped so much self-hatred that I wanted to reach over and smack him upside the head for it. She made her decision. You have made yours. It is the most you can do. Again I nodded, still at a loss for words. James was right. He would always be in love with Persephone, no matter what I did. I had to accept that, but part of me wanted him to love me too. Even if it was only enough to get him through the spring, it would do. Henry, I said, my throat tightening as I gathered the courage I needed, do you think you could ever love me, even a little? He looked stunned at my question, but his brow furrowed, and his mouth was slightly open. But I needed to know. I couldn't expect the fairy tale ending, but I never had one anyway. My fairy tale was one where both my mother and Henry were still alive, and since it was too late for my mother, all of my hope rested on Henry's shoulders. Finally he pressed his lips to the corner of my mouth in a chaste kiss, and then he said softly, as much as I am capable of loving anyone else. Yes. My heart sank, but while it wasn't the answer I'd hoped for, it would have to do. He took my hand in both of his and looked at me, as if daring me to look away. I didn't. You have fought for me, and I don't and do not think I have not seen that. You believe in me when few others will, and I cannot tell you how much that means to me. I will always treasure your friendship and affection. Friendship and affection, the words hit me like a rock, but I struggled to remember that they were better than the alternative, so much better. But something inside me felt empty, as if he'd stolen something precious from me. Maybe it hadn't been all romance and rainbows between us so far. But I'd hoped for more, and I didn't know how else to show him what I wanted, not without offering myself to him completely, and I couldn't, not yet, not when I didn't know if he felt the same. When we continued, When he continued, I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. If you are not deemed worthy, then I will step down, and it is my hope that if you wish, we might spend time together before I fade completely. A rush of surprise filled me, and I blinked back the stubborn tears that had formed in my eyes. How long would that be? I do not know, he said, but I suspect I will last until your death, if it comes to that. If you will still have me when this is through. I forced a small smile. That would be nice, I said, to be your friend. You are my friend, he said. And I said nothing. Friends, just friends, nothing more. I tried to feel relieved, to remind myself that I hadn't wanted any of this to begin with, but all I could feel was mind-numbing hurt. He said he would love me, and I believed him, but it would never be in the way I wanted. I didn't know when I decided I wanted more. Maybe the moment I kissed him at Christmas, or when I'd lost Ava all over again and couldn't bear to lose anyone else. But all I knew was that I did. It was something he could never give me, and that hurt more than I could stand. Most of February slipped by in the same monotonous pattern as before. I took my meals alone, and I had classes with Irene nearly every day. At that first exam, she never gave me another test again, although whether it was because she'd never intended on it, or because Henry had asked her not to, I didn't know. The one thing that was not monotonous was my time with Henry. Our conversation in the underworld had been a silent turning point, and while spending evenings with him was always the best part of my day, there was an underlying hurt now that I couldn't justify. He'd laid out what he wanted, and I knew I had to respect that. I couldn't have him, but with each evening that passed I felt myself falling deeper and deeper for him, spiraling downward into a place where the word love was synonymous with pain. Every look, every touch, every brush of his lips, as innocent as they might have been. How could he say he only wanted friendship when he was treating me like his partner, when he wanted me to be his wife? I didn't understand it, and as time passed, I grew more confused. I didn't know what this sort of love felt like, but by the time winter had started to come to an end, with the exception of my mother, I felt closer to him than I had to anyone in my life. It hurt to be away from him, but sometimes, when he told me stories of his life with Persephone, it was agony to be with him. Still, our friendship was so strong that it felt like the most natural thing in the world. There was no one I'd have rather spent my time with, no matter how much it hurt. Finally, despite there being so many tests remaining, it was March, and the last month I was required to stay in Eden Manor. On one hand, I was reluctantly excited at the thought of getting to leave and seeing the world again. On the other, I knew that was waiting for me when I left. If I were lucky, I would have one last day to sit by my mother's side and talk to her, whether or not she could really hear me. Then, once I said my goodbyes, she would die. I began to prepare myself for that reality, though I struggled with it, as I always had. How was I ever supposed to tell her goodbye? A few days into the month, Henry met with the council. I wasn't allowed to go, didn't want to go and face James, but I busied myself with entertaining Pogo in the green and gold drawing room while he was gone. I suspected it had something to do with my tests and how they'd seemed to stop in the months that followed Christmas, but I hadn't asked him before he left. The only thing I was certain in anymore was that no girl had gotten as far as I had, and with each day that passed the danger grew. Unless it really hadn't been James who'd killed all those girls, and as angry as I was with him, I refused to believe he was capable of murder. Whoever had done it was still out there waiting for the right time. Do you think he'll grow much bigger? Said Calliope, as we waited for Henry to return, and she scratched Pogo's pink belly. His tongue lolled out to the side, and he seemed to be enjoying himself. Doubt it, I said. He hasn't really grown much lately. Are you going to take him with you when you leave? I shrugged. Maybe. I haven't decided. He'd probably like it here better, wouldn't he? Before she could respond, the doors opened and a chill fell over the room. Calliope scrambled to her feet, still awkwardly holding Pogo, and I twisted around to see who was there. Henry stood framed in the doorway, anger rolling off of him in waves. I have to go, said Calliope, shoving Pogo in my arms and rushing out of the room. As she passed Henry, she gave him a strange and lingering look, though she didn't say anything to him. Several tense seconds passed before Henry finally spoke. I need you to stop eating. Cuddling Pogo to my chest, I sat down on one of the couches. Why? I like eating. Eating's sort of important to staying alive, and unlike the rest of you, that's something I happen to be. You do not need to eat here. Henry closed the door and moved toward me, but he didn't sit down. It is unnecessary, and you must adapt. Slowly I set Pogo down, and he at least had sense enough to run behind the couch. I, on the other hand, stupidly stayed put. I like eating. I'm not overweight, and I don't see what the big deal is. Henry's eyes were a stormy shade of gray that made me shiver. What about Calliope? What about her? Every time you sit down to a meal, you put her in jeopardy. I stared at him. It's a horrible thing for you to use against me. What am I supposed to say to that? It is true, he said harshly, and I would prefer that you say it is enough incentive to make you stop eating. I clenched my jaw. Why are you bringing it up now? He closed his eyes, a crease forming in the middle of his brow. I had never seen him so upset, even when Xander had been killed. But it was food. What was the big deal? It is a test, he said softly, as if he didn't want anyone to overhear. If you don't stop eating before the council makes their judgment, you will fail. Eating was a test? How can that possibly be a test? I blurted. What's the point? To see if I can starve myself until I'm so skinny that I'll die in the instant I leave? Gluttony, he said sharply, and I shut my mouth. And to see how well you adapt. This is what it tests. Do not yell at me, Kate. I am not the one who decided what the test would be. Gluttony. I had to think for a moment, but at once I realized where I'd heard the word before I froze. The 7 deadly sins? That's what I'm being tested on? Henry wrung his hands together. I cannot answer that. If the council discovers I have told you this much, there is a very good chance that we will automatically fail. We. The way he said it in a thick voice tugged at something inside of me, and with a start I realized he was finally doing it. I pressed my hands together, hardly daring to hope. You care? I said. I thought. He stood and started to pace, refusing to look at me. You have been unhappy with me. Why? I opened my mouth to protest, but nothing came out. He was right. Because, I said in a miserable voice and hating myself for it, I don't want to just be your friend. Henry stopped and turned toward me, though he didn't look surprised. Instead, he looked like he was trying to put the pieces together. I thought you did not want to act as my wife. I made a face. There are steps between friend and wife, you know. I mean, I know you're an ancient and all, but you must have at least heard of dating. He didn't smile, but his expression softened. If you pass, you will be my wife. Is that something you are willing to accept now? I nodded, trying to look too nervous, or think about the whole thing too much. Because you care for me? Yes, I mumbled, embarrassed. And if you hold out against me, I didn't have time to finish. 1 second he stood across the room, and the next he crouched down beside me, kissing me so deeply that by the time he finally pulled away, I was almost gasping for air. What? I started, but he pressed his finger against my lips. I care, he said in a trembling voice. I care so much that I do not know how to tell you without it seeming inconsequential compared to how I feel. Even if I am distant at times and seem as if I did not want to be with you, it is only because this scares me too. I stared at him. He leaned in and kissed my swollen lips again, and this time I kissed back. Time seemed to fall away around us, and all I could see, hear, taste, smell, feel was him. A delicious kind of warmth spread through me, but this time it wasn't my ankle that was healing. When he pulled away a second time, I let my hands fall from his hair to my side, and I watched him, unsure of what to do now. He straightened and stood, though he didn't take his eyes off me. Please, he said, stop eating. I nodded, too disarmed to come up with anything to say in protest. Thank you. He reached out to brush his fingers against my cheek, and then stepped toward the door. Before I could form any kind of coherent thought in my head, he was gone. I licked my lips, still able to taste him, and smiled. Finally, after nearly 6 months, he was trying. That night, as he always did, Henry slipped into my room after an hour after I finished dinner. I'd spent the afternoon wondering what would happen, if it would all go back to normal, or if there would be more of those heart-pounding kisses, but by the time he arrived, I decided it didn't matter. It was more than enough to know I was no longer alone in the fight for his existence. I am sorry, he said, lingering near the doorway. I was on my bed playing with Pogo, who had a new assortment of toys to keep him entertained. I looked up in time to see Henry close the door. My actions earlier were uncalled for. For one horrible moment, I thought he was apologizing for kissing me. It wasn't until I felt my face drain of color that I realized he was sorry for getting angry that I was still eating. And by then, all I could manage was a nervous laugh. You were just trying to warn me. I had one last meal tonight, but I'm done now, I promise. The Greek seafood pasta, which usually made me delirious with hunger, had tasted like sawdust in my mouth, and I'd only managed a few bites. But there would be no more food now. I made a promise to Henry, and I wasn't going to break it any more than I already had. He took a tentative step towards me. Still, I should not have yelled as I did. You did nothing to deserve it. You are worried, I shrugged. I want to pass, and I wouldn't have stopped eating if you hadn't told me, so thank you. He crossed the room and took a seat next to me on the bed, picking up one of Pogo's toys. Yipping happily, my puppy dropped the bone I'd given him and went after Henry, tugging and growling relentlessly at the piece of rope. "He is quite determined," said Henry with a tiny smile. "Stubborn as a mule," I said. "Thinks he's the size of one, too." Henry chuckled, and I was so relieved to see him happy again that I almost didn't hear the soft knock on my door. "Kate," it was Calliope. "Come in," I said, and she pushed the door open as she carried a tray with 2 mugs of hot chocolate she'd brought us every night. I glanced at Henry, silently asking for approval, and he nodded. When she set the tray down on the nightstand, he held up his hand to stop her. Even though she was staring at the carpet, she froze. "You sure it's safe?" It was the first time he'd ever questioned her in front of me. Since the incident at Christmas, nothing else had happened. No threats or suspicious packages, but Calliope still tried everything I ate. "I'm sure." Calliope spoke so softly I could barely hear her, and a blush stained her cheeks. "May I please go?" He nodded, and she left the room so quickly that I didn't have time to thank her. I eyed the door, wondering what was wrong, but the scent of cocoa reached my nose and distracted me. After handing a mug to Henry, I picked up my own and took a sip. Henry watched me closely, and my pulse increased, though I wasn't sure whether it was because I thought something might happen or because of the way he stared. Maybe both. I rolled my eyes playfully. "I'm not going to die today, Henry. I promise. Now are you going to tell me why Calliope's terrified of you?" He grimaced and drank, undoubtedly a stalling technique. "I am afraid she has been like that for a number of years. The ease you have while spending time with me is quite rare. Most are afraid of me." That's ridiculous, though part of me knew it wasn't. I was sure he held back when he was around me. When you are the ruler of the dead, it is not so difficult to see why others do not like you. He waved dismissively. "It is the same with most of the staff. Those who will look me in the eye when I speak to them are few and far between. I'm not afraid of you," and to demonstrate that point, I leaned forward and kissed him like he'd kissed me in the drawing room, careful not to spill my drink. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for him to respond, hoping he wouldn't pull away and declare everything that had happened a mistake. To my relief, he finally returned it. His lips were warm against mine, and he tasted like chocolate. Eventually he broke the kiss and took my mug from me, setting both of them on the nightstand. I do not think Pogo appreciates being ignored. Pogo was on his belly and watching us both intently. When he saw that I was looking at him, he wagged his tail. "Pogo, off," I said, tossing a few of his new toys from the mattress onto the pillow that served as his bed. He obeyed and scampered down, leaving me and Henry on our own. I turned back to Henry, feeling more relaxed and content than I had all day. "There," I said, leaning toward him again. "All better. The way he kissed me, I could have drowned in him and never been happier. Each time he touched me, I expected sparks, and the heat of his palm against my bare neck was almost too much to take. Crawling into his lap, I wrapped his legs around his waist, deepening the kiss. While I was leading, he seemed as eager as I was, and it felt as if all of the pent-up emotion was finally spilling out of both of us. Several moments later, I pulled away. "Henry?" I ran my hands through his hair as I caught my breath. "Can I tell you something and have you promise not to laugh at me?" "I would never laugh at you." His eyes reflected the ache I felt, and I knew I could trust him on that. Swallowing, I said in a low voice, "I'm not very good at this, the whole falling for someone thing, being with them, even with the kissing. I'm not very good." He started to protest, but I kept talking. Now that I knew he cared for me like I cared for him, I had to tell him. Maybe I should have given him more time to adjust, but there was an urgency that seemed to spread through me, making the words fall from my lips without anything to stop them. "I'm not, even if you think I am. But no matter what this started out as, an accident, fate, whatever, I'm glad you found me that night. Not because of what happened, but because of now. Because I get to be here with you. And I'm scared too, but thank you for telling me today. Thank you for trusting me with that. I pressed my lips together, trying to find the right words. I've never felt like this for anyone, and I'm not really sure what falling in love feels like, but I think I know I have with you." It wasn't the most eloquent speech ever, but Henry didn't seem to care. For the first time since we'd met, he looked bowled over, and I worried that I'd said too much. "Did you know," he said, his breath warm on my cheek, that is the first time anyone has ever told me they loved me?" Startled, I did the only thing I could think of. I kissed him again. "You better get used to hearing it more often, because I plan on saying it to you an awful lot." He returned my kiss, and my head spun as my hands drifted down to unbutton his shirt. This time we didn't stop. The next morning I awoke in a tangle of limbs. My head pounded and my body ached, but I couldn't find it in me to mind too much. The warmth and drowsiness I felt wrapped in Henry's arms was more than enough to make me happy. The previous night came flooding back to me, and I distinctly remembered skirting the topic of Henry with my mother, too embarrassed to tell her that I'd slept with him. But I didn't regret it. It simply wasn't the kind of thing I wanted to tell her until I had no choice. Better she assumed that sort of thing happened after the wedding, if it happened at all. Morning, I said, forcing my eyes to open. Instead of smiling, Henry was staring at me as if I'd grown another limb. Confused, I struggled to prop myself up on my elbow, but even that little movement felt like a knife being thrust into the side of my head. Wincing, I gingerly lay back on the pillow. One look at Henry's face told me I'd made things worse. He was standing before I realized he'd gotten out of bed. Producing a black silk robe out of nowhere, he quickly wrapped it around his body, never taking his eyes off me. But it wasn't the loving look he'd given me the night before. "Does your head hurt?" It seemed like a stupid question, all things considered. But I nodded, and immediately regretted it. "Do you feel achy?" "A bit," I admitted, squeezing my eyes shut. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer, forcing myself to open my eyes once more. I saw him standing over the mug, sniffing what remained of the hot chocolate. "Henry?" I said, my voice rising. "What's going on?" Without warning, he threw the mugs across the room. They smashed against the wall, staining the wallpaper. He roared and then proceeded to curse in another 20 languages I couldn't name. Struggling to sit up again, this time I pushed past the pain. I clutched the sheet to my chest and stared at him, too shocked to say anything. "Calliope!" he yelled, his voice booming. But there was no reply. Instead, Nicholas opened the door, making a point of not looking at me. "In bed," he said gruffly. "She is ill." Henry clenched fists so tightly that I was afraid he might hit something and destroy the whole manor in the process. "Look after her," he said, storming toward the door. "No one comes in or out of the room without my permission. Do you understand?" Nicholas nodded, his expression impassive. He wasn't helping. "Henry," I said in a small voice, my heart pounding in my chest, "what's going on?" "I'm sorry," he said, staring at me in a way that made my blood run cold. "I am so very, very sorry." And with no other explanation, he left. Chapter 16. The River Styx. I spent the rest of the morning in bed crying. My head ached, and my entire body was so sore that getting up didn't seem possible, but all I could think about was the way Henry had looked at me before he'd left, as if he would never see me again. It wasn't fair, and for the life of me, I didn't understand why he was doing this. Was it because I'd said I'd loved him? It had been quick, and I hadn't given it much thought. But after I said it, I knew it was the truth. I was willing to do anything it took to give him another chance, even if it meant giving up any choice I had in life. And if that didn't equal love, I didn't know what did. But it wasn't like I expected him to love me in return. The more I thought about it, the more I put the pieces together. The confession that fell off my tongue in the shower of words I couldn't stop, the sudden need to be with him, the warning not to eat. I'd been poisoned. Except this time, so had Henry and Calliope, and we'd all survived. If it's okay, I just want to check that this is really properly working still. I actually didn't get to check earlier yet, so now I do. Yep, it is working. That's fantastic. Alright. And for now, at least, my computer sounds like it's overheating, but I'm not noticing any more Copilot pop-ups or Outlook pop-ups. It was crazy for a while, though. It was like Outlook, Pilot, Word, Outlook, Pilot, Word, Outlook, Pilot. It was crazy. And I feel like that's because I installed updates and it just went crazy. I don't even know. I think there's like a glitch in the update or something. I mean, has anyone else installed the new Microsoft updates and had that happen where Copilot just goes insane? and the Outlook goes insane and it starts opening like crazy. Because that was scary. It was like suddenly I lost control of my computer, and that kind of thing has actually kind of sort of happened. But I thought it usually happened because like if the trackpad is dirty or something, it was like that. It was like having a dirty trackpad where the cursor goes weird. But in this case, like the cursor was going all over the place. I couldn't stop it. Like I was fighting the cursor. So yeah, that might actually mean I need to clean the trackpad or something. Maybe that's what's wrong. Or maybe I need to clean my laptop a little bit. I don't know. That was weird. Okay, but I'll go back to reading. It hadn't been designed to kill me. It was an aphrodisiac. Once I understood, everything seemed much clearer to me. The only question was who? Was someone trying to give me and Henry a push in the right direction, or was there something else to it? And if there was, who hated me enough to even try? The only person I could think of was Ella. She hated Ava, and maybe if she thought I was on her side, maybe she thought that getting rid of me would mean getting rid of Ava too. With the way Ava had behaved lately, I almost couldn't blame her, but what did Ella have to gain? James? I dismissed the thought as quickly as it appeared. Hello. The last thing he wanted was to push me and Henry closer together. It was possible that this was the intention, for Henry to storm out and ignore me for the rest of my stay, but it was a risk I was sure James wouldn't take. Giving Henry any excuse to fall for me and fight for his realm would be dangerous. Besides, the only surefire way to stop it was to make me fail a test, and my blood turned to ice in my veins. Of course, the tests: gluttony, the 7 deadly sins, lust. Despair filled the pit of my stomach. I'd failed, hadn't I? Even if it wasn't my fault, even if it had been an aphrodisiac, it didn't matter. That had to be why Henry was so upset. Anything else didn't make sense unless he really had been forcing affection for my sake. I didn't want to think about that. I didn't want to think about possibly failing either. So instead, I dragged myself out of bed, grateful that Nicholas was stationed outside my room instead of inside. Without any painkillers, I had to deal with the aches and pains, apparent side effects of whatever drug I'd been given, but even those were duller now. I dressed, and despite my protesting body, I picked up my clothes from the night before and remade the bed. The council had to see what had happened, that we'd been set up. If they were at all fair and just, they couldn't fail me because of this. I clung to that hope and the one last chance. I forced myself to push any other possibility aside. Everything would be okay. It had to be. Calliope came by shortly before sundown, looking about as sick as I felt. She was pale and trembling, and instead of sending her away, as Nicholas had with every other servant who tried to check on me, he offered his arm to her and escorted her inside. "Calliope," I said from my spot near the window, curled up in one of the overstuffed armchairs, "are you okay?" "I'm fine," she said with a tired smile as Nicholas helped her into a chair. "The more important question is, how are you?" I waited until Nicholas left to answer, even though I was sure he could hear everything through the door. "Tired," I admitted. "I ache a lot." That had unexpected results. Calliope's face crumpled, and in less time than it took for me to haul myself out of my chair, she was sobbing. "Oh, Kate, I'm so sorry. I didn't know until after I dropped it off, and I tried to send someone to warn you, but it was too late, and I didn't know what to do." I knelt beside her chair, taking her hand. "Don't apologize. You had no way of knowing, and I'm sorry they got to you, too." Her lower lip trembled, but she seemed to be making a valiant effort to keep herself in check. "I should have waited a few minutes. It was stupid of me, and it could have gotten you killed." "But you didn't," I said. "We're both fine. All three of us are fine." She stared at me, her eyes almost unnaturally wide. "But did you and Henry—" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "It's fine, Calliope, really. If this works out, then that would probably happen eventually anyhow, and if it doesn't, I won't remember it, so either way." The dark look on her face told me she didn't believe me. I didn't believe myself either. His extreme reaction to the drug had distracted me from thinking about the fact that something major had happened the night before, and it didn't feel as if it totally sunk in. This was supposed to be a big deal. I was supposed to feel upset or dirty or at the very least confused about what to feel about the whole thing, but at that point I was far more concerned about Henry than I was myself. "Why do you think it was inevitable that he go to bed with you?" said Calliope in a careful voice I couldn't read. "There are rumors that he has never, that he and Persephone didn't even." She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. I opened my mouth, fully intending on saying something intelligent, but the only thing I managed to blurt out was, "He was a virgin?" "No one knows for sure," said Calliope quickly. "He was very possessive of Persephone, but he did love her. He just She just didn't love him back, that's all. They had separate bedrooms and everything." I frowned. "He doesn't have to worry about that with me." "Which part?" "The part where she didn't love him back. I mean, if we'd met on the street or something, I probably wouldn't have even bothered. I mean, he's gorgeous." I remember what James had said so many months ago and managed a small smile. "He's a 10, a 12, even." The page keeps minimizing. It just started minimizing again, and I don't know why. And I'm nowhere near that. I wouldn't never worked up the courage to talk to him on my own, but getting to know him, it was pathetic and hard for me to admit, but it was the truth. And maybe if Calliope understood, she wouldn't feel so guilty about letting it happen in the first place. I love him. I don't understand how anyone could know him and not love him. Calliope stared at the carpet, her cheeks red. Me neither. I was silent, not knowing how to respond. Had she even intended for me to hear it? But she didn't say anything else, so I didn't press her. Eventually I stood on my aching legs and eased back down in my chair, wincing when my head protested. It wasn't the end of the world, but it was bad enough to make me glad I didn't have to trek down to the dining room for dinner tonight. "I have an idea," said Calliope cheerfully. Her bright mood, so different from what it had been only seconds before, startled me. "Yeah?" I said, not meaning to sound as suspicious as I did. "A picnic tomorrow. Once we've both recovered, we can walk over to the river and bring a blanket and everything. It's supposed to be warm." After getting a good look at the way she was leaning, beaming, there was no way I could have said no. She felt bad enough about getting Henry and me into trouble, and an afternoon away from the drama and confusion of the manor sounded wonderful. The thought of the river still sent a shiver down my spine, but I did my best to ignore it. "That sounds great," I said, and Calliope grinned. At the very least, it would serve as a nice distraction from the possibility that I'd already failed. Henry didn't show up that night, and for the first time since Christmas I slept alone. I tried not to think about it too much, but in the dark, with Pogo curled up beside me, it was impossible not to. Was he mad at me because I'd made him sleep with me and subsequently failed because of it? But I hadn't made him, had I? He hadn't tried to stop me. Was he mad because I'd said I'd loved him, and now that the drug had worn off he realized how stupid it sounded? Or did he feel guilty about it? I didn't care if he still loved Persephone. While I didn't exactly like her, he was dedicated and loyal, and that could still love someone who'd been so horrible to him, and that was nothing to feel guilty about. Unless he felt guilty because he loved his wife so much. Did he feel like he'd betrayed her? It was an accident, not a mistake, unless Henry thought it was. Maybe it wasn't exactly how I'd envisioned it all happening, but it hadn't been bad enough to make him feel like he had to stay away, had it? Or maybe he felt guilty for giving in and helping me fail. Even if that was the truth, it didn't explain his absence. It hadn't been his fault. And if I really had failed, there was no point in me staying in Eden Manor anymore. But I was still here, and that had to mean something. I slept badly, and even my dreams with my mother brought me no comfort. I was quiet and withdrawn, and while she asked me again and again what was wrong, I couldn't bring myself to tell her. I hated myself for it, not wanting to squander my last few weeks with her, but even if I could talk to her about it, I didn't know what to say. She was placing all of her hopes for my future in Henry, and I couldn't tell her how badly I'd managed to destroy it. It would break her heart, and at least one of us deserved to be happy. Thinking of Henry hurt in the morning brought no reprieve. I tried to leave my bedroom, but Henry's orders hadn't changed. I was stuck in that room until someone Henry trusted, which seemed to be limited to himself, Nicholas, and Calliope, came to pick me up. There wasn't anywhere to go, but I hated being caged. But wasn't that exactly what I'd been for the past 6 months? The small voice in the back of my head was surprisingly bitter. Hadn't I been caged like some sort of animal, like I belonged to him? No, I walked into this willingly, and he made it clear I wasn't being held against my will. It was terrible in me to even think otherwise. I wasn't Persephone. Calliope came to pick me up at noon, picnic basket in hand. She looked so happy that it felt like the conversation we'd had the day before never happened, and I didn't dare bring it up. We linked arms, and while we moved through the corridors, I kept my eyes peeled for any sign of Henry. He'd always been there when I wanted him to be, but now there's no sign of him. As we left the house, Nicholas tailed a few feet behind us. While being followed was still annoying, it was comforting to have him there. Limp or don't, no one could have been crazy enough to mess with him. Pogo also seemed fond of him as he followed him through the garden, sticking close to Nicholas instead of me. Kate, I looked up at the sound of my name, but that was as far as I got. In an instant, Nicholas was between me and Ava, who was standing on the other side of the fountain. It was the closest I'd been to her since Christmas. I didn't want to ignore her, but between all that had happened with Henry, she was one more thing I couldn't find the energy to deal with. She made me feel guilty, and I felt enough things right now without piling that on as well. Kate, Ava tried to move around Nicholas, but he was massive. Please, they wouldn't let me into your room, and I need to. Don't you get it? Said Calliope so viciously, and I stared at her, surprised. She doesn't want to talk to you. I could see Ava's expression underneath Nicholas's left elbow. She looked stunned. Kate, she said, her eyes welling with tears. Please, just for a minute. I stood there with my feet rooted to the ground. I'd never seen her look so scared in her life, and against my better judgment, I said, What is it? She looked at Nicholas and Calliope nervously. Can we talk alone? Nicholas scowled. No one is alone with her. Please, Nicholas, said Ava in such a familiar way that made me wonder if she had gotten to him as well. I just need a moment. Calliope cut her off. We're leaving now. Tugging at my elbow, she led me toward the forest. I didn't fight her, though I would have insisted on speaking with Ava only a few days before. But someone had to have done this to Henry and me, and as much as I hated the thought, Ava had the motivation to do it. All she would have had to do is slip into the kitchen and spike our drinks. Maybe she'd only been trying to help, to give me and Henry a push, not realizing what the consequences would be, or maybe she'd been trying to ruin things for me so completely that I felt as alone as she did. Neither possibility was pleasant. As we reached the edge of the trees, I glanced over my shoulder and saw Nicholas holding Ava's arm, stopping her from following us. She fought back, whirling around to face him and giving him a lecture. I was glad I couldn't hear, but at least she wasn't following us. How embarrassing, said Calliope, stepping gingerly over a thick root that sprung from the ground. It must feel awful to be in her position, but that's no excuse for acting like that. I dared another look. Nicholas was following us now, and Ava sat on the edge of the fountain, her shoulders slumped. She was watching me. I snapped my head around to stare straight ahead, not looking back the rest of the hike. I was silent, trying to sort through my thoughts. But my head was still a little muddled from whatever had been in my hot chocolate. Did I have it wrong? Was it possible that she'd heard about the poison as well? Was she concerned? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that she was the most likely suspect. After what happened over Christmas, I couldn't blame her for being angry with me, and I had so many things she didn't. Life, opportunity, and at least for a day, I'd had Henry. What was the next step? Did her jealousy give her motivation enough to try to kill me, or had she heard about Henry's reaction, and was that enough to satisfy her? The river's this way, said Calliope, interrupting my thoughts as we picked our way through the forest floor. I looked down as I walked, not wanting to trip. I struggled to come up with something to say that didn't involve Ava. Does it run through the whole place? I couldn't remember seeing any river on the other side of the hedge. It goes underground, said Calliope, as if this were perfectly normal. I heard Ava almost drowned in it once. Is that true? She didn't almost drown, I said, grimacing at the memory. She did drown. I had to jump in after her. It's how she died, hit her head on a rock. I focused on the forest floor, not wanting to think about that night. What do you think you'd be doing right now if you weren't here? If Ava hadn't died? That was the very question I'd been avoiding asking myself for the past 6 months. I don't know. I'd be back in New York, I guess. With your mother? I sighed. No, she'd have died by now. That was much easier to say than I'd expected. She wanted me to stay in Eden and finish high school, but I don't think I'd have been able to do that. Calliope shot me a sympathetic look, but I didn't want her pity. The clearing's just up here, she said, and peering through the trees, I saw it, a meadow about the side of my bedroom. I heard the river gurgling nearby. What about your father? What about him? I said. He's never been in the picture. I don't know where he is, and I don't care. We've always done fine without him. You're not so fine any more, said Calliope softly. I ignored her. My mother rarely talked about my father, and I'd learned from an early age not to mention him. It wasn't that she'd seemed angry or bitter about him. There simply wasn't much to tell. They hadn't been married. I hadn't asked what happened, and that was that. Any fantasies I'd had when I was little about him showing up on the doorstep one day and embracing me, buying me ice cream and toys, they were long gone now. My mother and I were a team. We didn't need anyone else. Calliope and I set up our picnic in silence, her laying out the blanket and me rifling through the food. Remembering my promise to Henry was difficult while staring directly into a basket stuffed with sandwiches and macaroni and fried chicken and the same luscious desserts I was served every evening, but I managed. Barely. I'm sorry, this looks delicious, but I can't eat, I said. I'm really not very hungry. Sure you are, she said, straightening out a corner of the blanket and flopping down in the middle. At the edge of the clearing, Nicholas loomed, looking surly. You didn't have breakfast. Besides, I'm eating too, remember? It's not, I bit my lip. The last thing I wanted was to insult her, but I couldn't very well tell her it was a test. After what happened, I promised Henry, that's all. I'm sorry. I should have told you that before you hauled all of this out here. I waited for her to say something, but her expression was unreadable. Finally she smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. It's no problem at all. Would you mind if I— Not at all, I said. Help yourself, really, and I don't mind my growling stomach. She started to unpack the basket, and I sat down across from her, folding my knees to my chest. We weren't very far from the spot where I'd first met Henry. It hurt to think about that, so I turned away, instead concentrating on Pogo as he pounced around on the grass. Calliope, can I ask you something personal? She didn't look up from unpacking. Of course. I glanced at Nicholas, who was still within earshot. It has to do with the stuff that was in the hot chocolate. Oh! Her cheeks colored. Maybe it'd be better if Nicholas— Right, I cleared my throat. Nicholas, do you mind giving us a few minutes? It just minimized again. He looked back and forth between us warily. I promise that no one's going to jump out and attack me in the middle of the forest, I said with a grim smile, and if they do, I've got Calliope and Pogo to protect me. Just a few minutes, I promise. I'll watch out for her, said Calliope, and Nicholas caved, melting into the trees. How did you handle it? The thing made me and Henry— Now it was my turn to blush. Instead of doing the same, something unreadable flashed in Calliope's eyes. I'm not seeing anyone, and I didn't have enough of the dose to be climbing the walls, as you must have, so I rested. Her tone was flat and unfriendly, and I frowned. What had I said? Why aren't you dating anyone? I said, figuring that was a safe enough question. I mean, you're pretty and smart and funny, and you must know a lot about everyone here. You're very kind, she said stiffly, but I'm afraid I will never be good enough for the person I want. My frown deepened. Of course you are. Any guy would be crazy not to want you, you know. No, Kate, her tone was icy now. I'm not good enough for him, and I never will be. He's made it perfectly clear that the only person good enough for him is you. Stunned, I stumbled over my words. Calliope, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to— Whoever it is, I'm sure I can talk them and figure it out, and— Are you really that dense? I fell silent. Apparently I was. You're Henry, she spat. I've been watching him weed through girls like you for decades. He doesn't care about me. All I am to him is someone to take care of his guests. Her eyes were bright with tears. I told him once, you know, the first time he invited a girl here, told him I'd be perfect for it, that I would love him and treat him 1,000 times better than Persephone ever did. And you know what he did? He walked away and never said a darn thing to me again, unless it had something to do with one of his spoiled girlfriends. I didn't know what to say or think. What was I supposed to do? Was this why she was mad at me? Because I'd slept with him while under the influence of some stupid aphrodisiac? I'm sorry, I said, fighting to keep my voice under control. I didn't choose this. Maybe if Henry never noticed you, maybe it was never meant to be. Of course it was meant to be, she exploded. How could it not be? I love him. I've loved him for longer than you've been alive. Her expression flattened, and for a frightening moment her eyes looked as dead as she was. And I will love him long after you're gone. From the picnic basket she withdrew something sharp and metallic. I didn't have time to run. She moved so fast, and the knife was a blur, and I tried to move to kick my legs out from under her and scramble away, but she grabbed my hair and yanked my head back, so hard I was afraid my neck would snap. Nicholas, I cried, but it was too late. I felt the pressure first, a strange pushing against my side. The pain didn't blossom until she yanked the knife out, and that was when I screamed. Instinctively I thrust my elbow at her, feeling something crack as it found purchase, If that only gave her another opening. I gasped as she thrust the knife into my belly, the wound instantly white hot. Already I could taste blood. How disappointing, she said, wiping the stream of blood from her broken nose. Is that really the best you can do? With one last burst of adrenaline, I lunged at her, my hands closing around her throat, but I was losing blood rapidly, and I didn't have the strength to do the damage I wanted to do. Helpless, I squeezed my eyes shut as she delivered her final blow, stabbing me in the center of my chest. This time she didn't bother pulling the knife out. She pried my hands from her neck and lifted me with ease. I could hear Pogo barking, the sound of it muffled and far away, and I tried to call out, but all I could manage was a sickening gurgle. Pain burned through me like fire. I grew dizzy, as if I were falling through a tunnel, but there was nothing I could do to hold on. The splash of freezing water roused me enough to open my eyes. My vision was blurry, and I could see Calliope looming over me. Her body moved away from me, but she stood still. With my mind so sluggish, it took me several seconds to understand that I was in the river and floating away. This was it. This was what death felt like, cold and wet and numb and fire as I struggled to breathe, but no air filled my lungs. Instead of being scared, I was relieved. I wouldn't have to say goodbye to my mother after all. If Henry had mercy on him, he would let her go to the instant he realized I was dead. Henry. After letting him lower his guard and get his hopes up, I'd managed to get myself killed. And if I was dead, he would be too. He hadn't given up on me, so that right did I have to give up on him. I struggled weakly against the current, but it was futile. I could barely move, let alone try to swim to shore. The river would take me, and if I were lucky, eventually they'd find my body washed up on the riverbank somewhere nearby. Above me, the sun streamed through the bare branches, and I let myself drift down into the darkness, no longer cold. Instead, I felt warm, as if Henry was embracing me, and I imagined him pulling me to shore. The cool air wouldn't hit my wet skin, and I would shiver. The page minimized again. I'm sorry. He would heal me, and in the end, everything would be all right again. But it was too late for happy endings. I was already dead. Chapter 17. Death. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but my mother wasn't it. Except there she was, looking as whole and healthy as she did every night when I fell asleep. Instead of greeting me with her usual smile, her expression was grim, and she stared at something in the distance. "Mom," I said. When she looked up at me, her eyes were so red and hollow that they couldn't have possibly been hers. Even in the worst days of her illness, she hadn't looked so empty. There had still been something inside her, a spark or a smile or something that reminded me she was still my mother, not this time. I tried to take her hand, but the ground was unsteady, and I fell back down onto the bench. It was dark outside, nothing like the usual bright days we spent together, but the full moon and the twinkling stars above us gave us enough light for me to make out where we were. We were still in Central Park, but for the first time since my dreams had begun, we weren't in Cheap Meadow. We were in a boat floating in the middle of the lake. I froze. This was exactly how I'd nearly drowned when I was a kid. "Mom, My voice cracked, weaker than usual. I was exhausted and badly wanted to close my eyes and forget about all of this, to let it fade away with the rest of my life. "I'm sorry." She stared out across the water, her misery painted so clearly on her face that I could feel it. "It isn't your fault," she said, her voice cutting through the eerie quiet that surrounded us. Even the things that usually made sounds like crickets chirruping or leaves rustling in that breeze were silent. All I heard was her voice and the sound of waves lapping against the side of the boat. It was as if we were the only living things in the city. I was too exhausted to move, but I wanted so badly to cross the boat and touch her, to show her I was still here, even if it wasn't for much longer. But it was Calliope this whole time, and I never saw it. I should have. "There have been so many others who have known her for so much longer than you," said my mother. "If anything, they should have been the ones to see it, not you. You cannot blame yourself for something you could not have possibly known." "But I should have," I said, my voice so strained I was afraid it might disappear. "I knew someone wanted to hurt me, and I should have tried to find out who it was, but I was so concerned about Henry, and I thought no one would dare when he was around. I thought I was safe." "You should have been." I could see the moonlight reflected on her cheeks, a sure sign she was crying. "I should have done more." I hesitated. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering me, she stood and crossed the boat, making it sway. I gripped onto the edges as hard as I could, but drowning was the least of my worries. If I wasn't already dead, I would be soon enough. She sat beside me and enveloped me in her arms, and it was all I could do to keep my composure. One of us had to be strong. I don't know how long we sat there, listening to the boat bob up and down the water. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to stop in this place, and her embrace was all the protection I needed against the cool night air. I ran through the events that had happened by the river, how one moment Calliope had been my friend and the next my killer. How had I not seen it? But looking back on it, what was there to see? Why do you think she did it? I mumbled against my mother's shoulder. She said she loved Henry, but why kill everyone? Why risk her life like that, too? She ran her fingers through my hair. I was sure she meant to comfort me, but it only reminded me of what I was losing, what we both were losing. I'd failed her just as much as I'd failed Henry, but at least she'd forgive me for it. I wish I could forgive myself as well. Why do you think? She said gently, and I shrugged. I don't know. My mind wandered from Calliope to Henry to Ava, who had been so desperate to find love. Maybe she was as lonely as she was. Maybe she thought she could save him. But if she really did love him, how could she risk his existence like that? I mean, if I were her, I would have rather seen him with the man than not. See him with me than not see him at all. There's more than one kind of love, said Mother. Maybe that's the difference between you and Calliope. Maybe that's why you were chosen and she wasn't. I closed my eyes and I tried to think about it, but nothing outside the sway of the boat and the sound of my mother breathing made sense anymore. I don't want to go, I whispered. I don't want to stay. Goodbye. She buried her face in my hair. You won't have to. Before I could figure out what she meant, the boat glided toward the shore. When it came to a stop, I opened my eyes and saw a silhouette cast against the water, distorting as the water rippled. My mother's slender arms were replaced with muscle, and I felt myself being lifted out of the boat. I wanted to struggle, to insist on staying with my mother, but my tongue felt heavy, and my thoughts sluggish. I've got her, said a pained voice. Henry. Thank you, said my mother. Her voice weighed down with something I didn't understand. She brushed a hand against my cheek and leaned forward to kiss his. Take care of her, Henry. I will, he said, but there was nothing beyond that. My mother bent down and pressed her lips to my forehead. I desperately wanted to take her hand, but she did it for me, and using the last of my strength, I managed a small squeeze. Mom? Even to me, my voice sounded foreign and twisted, as if I were only beginning to learn how to form words. It's all right, sweetheart. She pulled away, and I could see the tears in her eyes. I love you, and I'm so proud of you. Don't ever forget it. Panic bubbled inside of me, but with no way of releasing it. I suffered through the heart-wrenching pain. She was leaving. This was the end. I was supposed to have weeks more with her, but wasn't that our deal? Stupid me. How could I possibly spend more time with her when I was dead and she wasn't? Love you too, I said, and though it came out as more of a gurgle than anything, she smiled. As Henry turned away from her and carried me into the inky blackness of the night, I turned my head enough to watch her grow smaller and smaller in the distance. Finally she seemed to fade and she was gone. I clung to her last words, the glue that held me together, and I struggled to resist the deep lull of sleep. I would see her again when she passed, and there would be no end of sunny summer days we could spend together in Central Park. But even though I knew this, even though Henry was carrying me to my own death, I couldn't help but form a single word on my lips, one I'd resisted saying for so many years, the one word I hoped I'd never have to say, goodbye. I expected death to be cold. Instead, the first thing I felt was warmth. Incredible warmth that filled my body, or at least what was left of it, and spread through me like honey. Was this what Ava went through? Waking up warm? It seemed too easy. And then the pain started. Overwhelming, agonizing pain in my chest and my side, exactly where Calliope had stabbed me. Gasping, I mentally kicked myself for thinking it'd be so simple. Ava hadn't shown any signs of her head wound, after all, and my body had to heal before I could get up and walk around. Whispers filled the air, and I couldn't make them out. Other dead souls? Would my mother be there waiting for me already? Would I open my eyes and see grass and trees and sun, or is there more to it? I should have asked Henry when I'd had the chance. It seemed like ages before I forced myself to look. At first the light burned, and I closed my eyes again, but when I took it slowly, they adjusted. This time my gasp had nothing to do with pain. I was in my bedroom in the manor, surrounded by familiar faces. Ava and Ella, Sophia and Nicholas, and even Walter was there, and they all looked worried. And out of the corner of my eye I saw him, Henry. My heart skipped a beat. But I was already too confused to wonder why it was still pumping in the first place. This wasn't Central Park. Am I dead? Or at least that's what I meant to say. It came out more like a croak, and my throat was on fire. But what did it matter? Henry was there. He grimaced, and a block of ice filled my stomach. I was dead, wasn't I? He could barely even look at me. No, said Henry, staring down at my hands. He was holding mine. You are alive. My heart managed to sink and soar at the same time. That meant it wasn't over. That we could still do this. That I might still pass. But then I remembered my mother's last words, and I realized what she'd meant. It hadn't been my time to go, it had been hers. Horror filled me, and I couldn't help the rush of tears, too exhausted to hold them back. I struggled to sit up, but the pain in my chest was torture. Lie still, said Walter sternly, putting a cup of warm liquid to my lips. I drank the sweet medicine, my eyes still streaming. Everyone watched me, but I never looked away from Henry, too devastated to be embarrassed. "Henry," I slurred, as the medicine took effect. "Why?" I couldn't get my question out. Fighting against the urge to close my eyes, I tried to wriggle my toes to keep myself awake, but even that hurt. "Sleep," he said. "I will be here when you awake." Having no choice, I let myself drift away, clinging to his words, to hope that he was telling the truth. That night I didn't dream of my mother, and I knew I never would again. Nightmares filled the hours instead, images of water and knives and rivers of blood, and no matter how loudly I screamed, I couldn't wake up. They were different from the ones before I'd moved to Eden Manor. Those had been menacing somehow, a warning. These were memories. In what felt like an eternity, I woke up. My eyes flew open, my body still aching and the tension in my muscles doing nothing to help it. I expected light, but for several seconds there was nothing but dark, and as my eyes adjusted I had noticed Henry. He'd pulled an armchair up next to the bed, and while the other three sides of the curtains were closed, there was enough space open on the fourth for me to see him. He was still holding my hand. "Good morning," he said. There was a distance to his voice that I didn't understand. "Morning?" I mumbled, trying to move my head to look out the window, but the curtains were closed. Henry ran his hand over a candlestick in the nightstand, and the wick burst into flame. I wasn't much light, but it was enough for me to see. "Very early in the morning. It is still dark out." He hesitated. "How are you?" Good question. I considered it for a moment, surprised when I realized that the pain had lessened. But that wasn't what he'd meant, and we both knew it. "She's gone, isn't she?" "She asked to take your place, and I allowed it," he said, his eyes trained on our joined hands. "It was the only way I could take you from the underworld. A life for a life. Even I cannot break the laws of the dead." His words hit me hard, and I licked my dry lips. "She gave up her life for me?" "Yes," he said, offering me a cup of water. I took it with shaking hands, spilling more than I got inside of me. Henry refilled it, and this time he held the cup to my lips for me. "You are dead, and I could not heal you. It was her last gift to you." I let out a soft sob as grief washed over me. She was gone, all because of my mistake, because I'd let Calliope get too close, because I'd trusted the wrong person. It felt like a piece of myself had disappeared, like I'd lost something vital I would never get back. I was empty and full of heartache at the same time, and everything felt wrong. Several minutes passed before I could look at Henry again, let alone talk. When I did, my vision was blurred and my voice hoarse and forced. "What happened after the river?" His grip on my hand tightened. "Ava was the one who found your body. She spent a very long time trying to save you, but despite her efforts, there was one hope." My throat closed. After all I'd done to her, Ava still tried to save me. "And Calliope?" Henry's expression hardened. "Nicholas apprehended her. She will be tried and punished for her actions, and I promise you that as long as I'm in charge of hell, you will never have to see her again." I shivered, and Henry covered me with the blanket once more. I didn't have it in me to tell him I wasn't cold. "She was the one who sent those nightmares," he said, "and the one to try to run you off the road. She saw the potential in you as we all did, and it is my guess that she feared the only way to stop you was to get you before you were in Eden Manor. She almost succeeded, too. If I hadn't been sure before, I was now certain that the only reason the car hadn't crashed into the trees was because Henry had been there to protect us." "What's going to happen to her?" "I do not yet know. She must have known she could not get away with it, as she did not try to run or deny her involvement, but—" He hesitated. "I suspect she thought she would be above punishment. In light of all that has happened, I thought it appropriate that you have a hand in deciding her fate." I started to ask why she thought she wouldn't be punished, but part of me already knew. She loves you so much that she couldn't stand the thought of you being with anyone else. She thought she was the only person who could make you happy. And instead she is the one who almost ruined the rest of my existence. Henry bent down and kissed my knuckles. Another shiver ran through me, completely different from the first. "I am the one who failed, not you, and I will do that I must to spend the rest of our time together making it up to you. You didn't fail me." I tried to turn on my side to face him, but movement only brought pain. "I'm the one who failed you." He must have known I meant the test, but he shook his head anyway. "You could never fail me. I should have seen the signs long before this, and never allowed her anywhere near you, and for that I am so very sorry. I was silent for a long moment, and at last I said in a small voice, "Are we okay? Not this, but the drink and—" "Yes," he said. "I apologized for the way I reacted that morning. I was not angry at you. I was angry—" He stopped, fury briefly contorting his face, but when I blinked, his expression was blank. "It was not your fault. It was a tainted drink, nothing more. Even if I failed, I still love you, you know." Several seconds passed, and when it was clear that he wasn't going to say anything in reply, I closed my eyes and sighed. My body screamed for sleep, and with my mind numb from the loss of my mother, I was sure that any attempt to resist would be lost. I couldn't be sure, but as I found the edge of consciousness, his voice reached me, gentle and warm, and everything I so badly needed to hear. "I love you too." Chapter 18. The Offer. For the next week, Henry stayed by my side. Whatever was in the sweet tonic Walter kept pouring down my throat worked, and I spent most of the time asleep. Eventually, the nightmares faded, but I still woke up gasping, unable to forget what the freezing of water of the river felt like as it closed around me. The pain of my mother's death didn't dull, but I slowly managed to accept that it would be there for a long time, and wallowing in misery when I was supposed to be healing would only hurt Henry. It would be an insult to the gift she'd given me to ignore what she wanted from me. And the past 6 months had prepared me for this. They'd given me the chance to say goodbye in a way I would have never been able to do without Henry. Even though it hurt just as much, there was a kind of peace inside of me that wouldn't have otherwise been there. I held on to the hope that if the council decided to accept me, despite what had happened between me and Henry, that I would one day be able to visit her, to talk to her and walk with her again. Death wasn't the end. Ava was proof of that, but I still mourned her. I still missed her. I had a steady stream of visitors. At first it was Henry and Walter, but after I insisted, Ava was allowed into my room as well. The moment she saw me, she flew to the side of my bed, her eyes red and puffy. "Kate, oh God, you're all right. They say you were okay, but I was afraid they were just saying that, because you know how people can be. But you're really here and awake, and oh my God." She wrapped her arms around me so loosely that I could barely tell they were there. But I didn't care if it hurt a little. I hugged her as tightly as I could, and then spent the next 30 seconds paying for it. Pain shot through me, reaching all the way to the tips of my fingers and toes, but it was worth it. "I'm sorry," she said, blushing deeply as I gasped. On the other side of the bed, Henry looked worried, but by now he was used to me overexerting myself. As long as my stitches didn't start to bleed, everything was fine. "Don't," I said once I could talk again. "I wanted to hug you. I am so monumentally sorry for everything, for yelling at you about Theo, for saying all that awful stuff to you. You didn't deserve it, any of it." She waved her hand dismissively. "It doesn't matter. You were right. I was being an idiot, but you're alive. You're going to make it, and I won't be stuck here without my best friend." She gave me a look she must have intended to be stern, but it made me smile. "You know none of this would have happened if you had let me teach you how to swim." "Yeah, you were right on that," I said, ignoring the part where I'd been stabbed before being thrown into the river. I doubted it didn't matter much to Ava. "Tell you what, once Henry says I'm all right, we can find some place on the grounds and you can teach me how." The grin on Ava's face was more than worth whatever it would cost me to get into the water again. After she left that afternoon, Henry and I played cards. Even though I was recovering, I was still destroying him. But he didn't seem to mind. Instead, he seemed to enjoy having his backside handed to him, and I was more than happy to oblige. "I'm going to miss you over the summer," I said after winning my 5th game in a row. "I'm beating you at jacks." Henry eyed me as he shuffled a deck. "I will miss you as well." There was a note of finality in his voice that frightened me. I held out hope that the council would understand and see that sleeping together hadn't been our fault, but that he had spent the past week preparing to say goodbye to me. "Henry," I said softly, "can we play pretend for a little while?" He didn't look at me. "Of course." I took a deep breath. "Can I visit sometime? I mean, I know I'm supposed to be going out and exploring the world, getting an education, passing high school, all of that, but I figured that maybe if I wind up staying in Eden, I could stop by every now and then before September." Henry hesitated. "I didn't mean to wait until after the meeting with the council to discuss this with you." "Discuss what with me?" "Your freedom." He looked up to me and I stilled. "After all you have been through on account of me, I could not possibly ask you to return in the fall, no matter the council's decision." I tried to hide my hurt, but there was a flash in his eyes that made it clear he noticed. "You don't want me to come back? If I had my way, you would never leave. But that was not our bargain. And more than that, you have endured a great many hardships because of me. I do not wish to further make your life miserable by forcing you to return, so I am offering you your freedom, no matter what the council decides, your permanent freedom." It took me several seconds to understand what he was saying. He wanted me here, but he felt guilty. Because of what? Because of what Calliope did? "But I want to come back," I blurted. The thought of never seeing him again made my heart race. Maybe he didn't get it, But Eden Manor was all I had left. What am I supposed to do if you don't let me come back? You and Ava and Ella and Sophia and I faltered, too choked up to continue and white to my eyes. Abandoning his cards, Henry brushed back his hand against my cheek. If you wish to come back, then I would like that very much. It is your choice to make, and that you would choose staying here over living your life, I cannot tell you what that means to me. But I am living my life, I said miserably. And I can live my life with you too, but just because it's a little unconventional doesn't mean it isn't as good as everything else that's out there. Better even, tons better. He hesitated. You are very kind. It means the world to me that you think that, but if I may say this, and hope you do not take it any sort of slight, you are not living, Kate. Not with me and not in the real world. You are waiting for your mother to die, and now that that has happened, now that she's gone, the only thing I have left is this place, and the only person I have left is you, I said. It'll take more than a knife-wielding murderer to make me give you up. Instead of fighting me on it, his face broke out into the first real smile I'd seen from him since I'd died. Good, then the feeling's mutual. He held up the deck of cards. Shall we? I hear the sixth time is the charm. I rolled my eyes. Maybe you'll win when Hellfleece is over. He raised an eyebrow. That could easily be arranged. When the council convened the day before the spring equinox, I still wasn't healed enough to walk on my own. It took both Ava and Ella to help me dress, and by the time we were done, I was so exhausted that I wanted to crawl back into bed. Maybe they could wait another day, said Ava, biting her lip as she eyed me. I sat in the armchair, and Henry usually occupied, cradling my head in my hands. No, I said with a grimace, I'm fine. Just give me a minute. Would you? They forced me to wear a white dress, and I was too afraid of popping a stitch to move. The only good thing about these injuries was that a corset was out of the question. But that meant that there was a very little padding between the fabric and my bandages. One wrong move, and I'd be standing in front of the council with my chest covered in blood. Would you like me to fetch Henry? Said Ella. She was still keeping her distance from Ava, but since the river incident she seemed to be making an effort to tolerate her. It probably didn't help that Theo and Ava were back together again, and Ella was putting on a brave face. I had to give her credit for that. No need, said a deep voice. I pulled my face away from my hands enough to see Henry standing in the doorway. Girls, you are dismissed. They scattered quickly, although Ava paused to give me a quick kiss on the cheek. Good luck, she whispered. And then she was gone. Henry was by my side before I could sit up straight. Are you well? I feel like I'm going to puke. The corner of his mouth twitched, as do I. He offered me a hand, and I took it, relying on him for balance as I stood. There was no way I was going to make it all the way to the bell room, where the meeting would be held. Do I have to wear shoes? I said, glancing at the heels Ava had picked out for me. Your gown is so long that the hem should hide your bare feet, said Henry. He hesitated, then said in a low voice, Kate, are you sure? Sure I don't want to wear shoes? Yes, I can barely walk. No, I mean, are you certain that you do not wish to take me up on my offer? He was trying to open word, and it's trying it again. No. Never seeing Henry again, or returning to Eden. I couldn't think of anything I wanted less. Positive, I said, leaning against him. If we don't leave now, we'll be late. I'm not exactly in any shape to be sprinting down the hallway. Do not worry about that. He brushed his warm fingertips against my cheek. You understand the consequences of passing and failing? If I fail, I go back to the real world with my memory wiped, and Henry would fade into nothingness. If I succeed, I hang out here with you for 6 months a year. For eternity, unless you wish to end your life, said Henry. You will forever stay as you are today, and you will be granted immortality by the council. No? No? And now it's powering up Outlook. You will forever stay as you are today, and you will be granted immortality by the Council. It is not an easy thing, immortality. You will form connections with mortals, and you will live well beyond their lifetimes. There will never be an end. Your life will be continuous, and eventually you will lose touch with humanity. You will forget what it was to be alive. The thought of forever was daunting. It took away the uncertainty in life that was death. But what good did dying bring? All it brought was pain, and I'd had enough of that to last me the next 1,000 lifetimes or so. Well, then I guess a good thing my best friend is already dead, isn't it? Yes, he said dully, you are quite lucky. No one ever said this was going to be easy, I said, I know that. Indeed, he said, his eyes focused on something I couldn't see, and you do understand that success also means that you and I will be married? I didn't know if the shiver that ran down my spine was out of the excitement or nerves. Yeah, I sort of picked up on that. You don't mind, do you? I mean, I know it's a little fast and all. He cracked a smile. No, I don't mind, do you? Did I? I wasn't ready to be anyone's wife or queen, but it meant I would get to keep him. He'd said that I would be free to be with others and live my own life during my 6 months away if I wanted, and while I couldn't imagine finding anyone who could compare to him, it helped alleviate the feeling of being trapped. I shook my head. Just as long as you don't make me wear a dress for the ceremony. Henry gave me a look. Why do you believe you are dressed in white? Oh, I made a face. That's not very fair, you know. Yes, I know. He wrapped his arm around me, the weight of it familiar and comforting. Now we must leave, else we truly will be late. Close your eyes. I did as I was told, wishing my stomach would stop doing somersaults long enough for me to get through this without ruining my gown. When I opened them, we were in the ballroom. It was empty, except for 14 magnificent thrones arranged in a circle, all from the hall in September. All in September. Each was unique. Some were made of wood, others of stone, silver, or gold. One looked like it was even made out of branches and vines, but I couldn't get close enough to get a good look. Waiting for me in the center was a padded stool. We appeared only a few feet away from it, and Henry helped me to it, and didn't let go of my hand until I was settled. Comfortable? He said. I nodded, and he pressed his lips to my forehead for a lingering moment. No matter what happens, I will always be there for you, even if you do not remember who I am. As his eyes searched mine, I forced a small smile, too nervous to really try. Beneath me, the lace of the cushion was irritating, but I didn't trust myself to move. There's no way they could make me forget you, I said, no matter what they do to me. I saw a glimpse of the sadness in his eyes before he looked away and sat back. I will see you shortly, he said. Do not move. I blinked and he was gone. I examined the thrones to keep me busy, trying to figure out what the owners might be like. The largest one, looking like it was shaped out of glass, sat directly in front of me. Seeing all the 14 circled around me made my heart pound and my palms sweat, and I fought to keep myself as calm as I could. Instead, I looked around trying to figure out which one belonged to James. Not the one made of seashells. Silver or gold, perhaps, but maybe the one that glowed like an ember. Thinking about James gave me a headache, so instead I closed my eyes. That was it. There were no more chances and nothing I could do to change the council's mind. The thought was strangely comforting, knowing that whatever they'd had in store for me was over. For better or worse, I'd survived. Barely. But my mother hadn't, and losing her darkened everything I did now. It felt wrong to be here, knowing she was alone. She was the most important thing in my life, and to think that something other than missing her, it felt like a betrayal. I hadn't moved on, not after only a week, and I was afraid she thought I had. Stupid, and I knew it. This was what she'd wanted for me, wasn't it? Wouldn't she still be proud of me if I failed? Would she still have given her life for mine if she'd known it wouldn't do any good? Of course she would have. She loved me just as much as I loved her. Death didn't change that, and neither did failure. But I would pass if I could, and if I had any chances left for her and for Henry. The sound of faint yelling pulled me away from my thoughts. A door on the left side of the ballroom burst open, and Henry stormed inside. No, he said, anger saturating his voice. I made her a promise, and I have no intention of breaking it. It was not your promise to make. I tried to see the owner of the second voice, but he was blocked by a throne that looked as if it were full of water. She is one of us, and she will stay. She is not welcome in my home, said Henry with a growl, and it made her hair on the back of my neck stand up. Either she stays or we all go. I watched wide-eyed as Henry slammed his fist into the wall, making the entire room tremble. I started to slide off my stool, but stopped when I winced in pain. Moving wasn't a good idea right now, and it'd only make Henry angrier. Fine, but she leaves the instant it is over. Agreed. With fury radiating from him, Henry stormed across the room to where I sat. Brushing his lips against my cheek, he whispered, "Kate, I am so sorry. Whatever it is, it's okay," I said, trying to remember a promise he'd made about he might be forced to break. Nothing came to mind. He straightened up and set his hand on my shoulder. I could feel how tense he was, and it did nothing to help my own nerves. "Brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews, may I present you Catherine Winters." I started to chastise him for introducing me by my full name, but my breath caught in my throat when I saw the procession of people walking towards us. I gripped the edge of my seat, too stunned to move. Walter was first, dressed in a simple white robe. After him came Sophia, her cheeks blushing as she caught my eye. James was next, and he stared at the ground. I wanted to look away, but my eyes followed him all the way to his throne. His was the one that looked like the arms were made from two snakes. I shivered. After him, Irene entered, and then Nicholas and Philip, the gruff stable hand, Ella holding Theo's hand, Dylan from Eden High School, a face so distant in my memory that it took me a moment to place him. And by the time Xander stepped through the door, looking whole and well, I was too floored to wonder exactly how he'd come back from the underworld. Henry's grip on my shoulder increased when the next person stepped inside the circle, and I suddenly realized why he was angry, Calliope. But she wasn't the last. My stomach contracted when I caught sight of who brought up the rear. Ava. They all stood in front of their respective thrones, giving me a few merciful seconds to stop my mind from reeling. I vaguely noted that 2 of the thrones were empty, and Walter claimed the massive throne made of glass. But the room spun around me, making it difficult to focus. "Kate," said Henry, "I present to you the Council." Chapter 19. The Council. It took every ounce of willpower I had to keep breathing as I stared at the faces of the Council. Friends, enemies, but not the strangers I'd been expecting. Dozens of questions darted through my mind, some staying still long enough for me to force it out. All in all, that was probably a good thing, but I didn't understand. This was the Council? I looked up at Henry, and he gave me a reassuring smile. It didn't help. "I will be right here," he said before moving to sit at one of the 2 empty thrones. I'd never felt so alone in my life. I started finally finding my voice. "How do—" Ava was the one who answered. "I'm sorry for lying to you, Kate. We all are, but this is how it had to be. We needed to know that you were able and worthy to fulfill this role," said Ella, all traces of bitterness gone from her voice. "While it may feel like we betrayed you, it's really the opposite. We now know you well enough to decide whether or not you're fit to become one of us." I focused on Henry, the only one I trusted to be honest with me. It was all a setup? Ava and the river? Xander? Theo? Calliope? No. His voice was so firm that I instantly fell silent. "Not all of it. Be patient, Kate. You will find out soon enough." I was more than willing to shut up and let them get on with it. If I'd been nervous before, now I was petrified. Glancing at James, I noticed he refused to meet my eyes. Slowly, resentment filtered through the other emotions churning inside of me, and I balled my hands into fists. No matter what Henry said, it was impossible that this was some sort of coincidence. Everyone I knew in Eden was here. "Before we begin," said Henry, this time addressing the council, "I believe there is a matter that has yet to be decided." Calliope, who was to my right, stepped forward. She looked furious. "Sister," he said in a booming voice that echoed through the room, "you've admitted to killing at least 11 mortals in cold blood over the past 100 years. Do you plead guilty?" She sniffed and narrowed her eyes. "Yes." Henry looked at me, the gravity of his stare making my heart thud. "As her only surviving victim, Kate, her punishment falls to you." Bewildered, I looked back and forth between them, trying to figure out if he was joking. He wasn't. I froze. How was I supposed to do this? Taking a deep breath, I said in a small voice, "What are the options?" "Whatever you wish," said Henry, his eyes as hard as diamonds as he glared at Calliope. I opened my mouth and shut it again. This was the job, wasn't it? The one I was supposedly signing up for? Deciding people's fates? If I couldn't figure out, then I was the one she'd tried to kill. How was I supposed to decide for people I'd never met before? As I stared at Calliope's pale face, I realized it wasn't knowing her that made me freeze up. It was knowing why she did it. She loved Henry, and like me, she must have hated seeing him hurt. Putting up with Persephone, knowing she didn't love him, having to watch him go through losing her, and then being faced with girls who were supposed to take Persephone's place when she'd loved him first. No one could have possibly been good enough for him, not when she was standing right there and waiting for him to notice her. There was no excuse for murder, but I understood wanting to be the one to make Henry happy. I chose my words carefully, keeping eye contact with her as I spoke. She stood across from me, looking like she wanted to kill me all over again. I know you don't like me. I know you think I'm not good enough for Henry, and I know you want him to be with you. I get why, too. I get that you love him and just want him to be happy. I get that you probably thought the girls who came before me were too stupid or pretty or selfish to love him like you do, and I know that love can make people do some dumb, hurtful things sometimes. I glanced at Henry, but his expression was impossible to read. I can't punish you to eternal torture or whatever it is just because you loved someone enough to try to protect him. While you went about this the wrong way, I get what you were trying to do, and that makes this really, really hard. Again, I looked at Henry, although this time he was looking at the ground. I want you to spend time with every girl you killed, I said, my voice breaking. I want you to get to know them and appreciate them for who they are. I want you to stay with them one by one until you understand their individual worth. I can't make you like them, but I want you to respect them and appreciate them as people. It can't be superficial either. You have to mean it. And I want you to make amends with them as well. Calliope glared at me with such intensity that I considered myself lucky to still be in one piece. Angering a goddess wasn't the smartest thing to do if I wanted to stay alive for much longer, but I trusted Henry to make sure she didn't turn me into a pile of ash. When all this happens, and when they forgive you for what you did to them, then you can go on and live your life or whatever it is that you have. But you're never going to see Henry or me again after today, not because I want to hurt you or because I hate you. I don't. Like I said, I understand why you did it in a way, but neither of us can trust you anymore. Even though I was sure that I was being fair, my decision felt cruel. She loved him. The possibility of never seeing Henry again tore at me, and I'd only known him for 6 months. How could I possibly be okay with separating her from the person she loved for the rest of her eternal existence? And if I wanted to let you know that I love him too, I said quietly. If I pass, I'm never going to hurt him like Persephone did, and I'll do everything I can to make sure she's happy. I promise. He's happy, I promise. A long moment passed before Calliope reacted. I half expected her to scream and shout and tell me how unfair I was being, but instead she nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. Stepping back to her throne made of cushion and lace, she sat down looking like I'd ripped her heart out of her chest. I felt like the most horrible person on the planet. The only thing that kept me from taking it all back was the ache in my abdomen from where the knife had slid inside of me. And so the decision has been made, said Henry in a grimly satisfied voice. I will uphold Kate's ruling no matter what the council decides. As will I, said James weakly. I felt a stab of pity for him, but there was nothing I could say to make it any better, not when I didn't understand it in the first place. Henry sat back down, and it was several seconds before anyone spoke. I stared down at my lap, too afraid to see the looks on their faces. Was I fair? Or did they too think I was being cruel? Catherine Winters, said Walter as he stood, and I looked up. You were tasked with 7 tests, to be distributed throughout your time in Eden Manor. No. If you have failed any of this, you will return home and live out your existence without any memory of the past 6 months. If you succeed in all 7, you will be married to our brother, and you shall rule this realm with him for as long as you wish. Do you accept? There was no backing down now. Yes. Irene stood next, her hair flaming in bright light. For the test of sloth, Kate passed. She gave me an impish smile. Your study habits were quite inspiring, you know. Was that what Henry had meant when he said I couldn't possibly fail after nearly killing myself studying for that stupid test? It had to be, but they couldn't all be so simple. Sophia was next. She looked as warm and motherly as ever, and it was hard to imagine that she could be part of something so terrifying and official. For the test of greed, Kate passed. She must have seen my confused look because she smiled and added, Your clothing, dear. When you were offered a new wardrobe, you didn't hesitate to allow your friends to help themselves as well. I breathed a sigh of relief. Apparently not liking dresses was a virtue. Gluttony, said Ella, standing. I furrowed my brow. Out of all of them, I'd have thought Calliope would have been the one to handle that. While Kate was made aware of it as a test, while she was unconscious of for much of the time afterward, she did willingly make the choice to stop eating. She raised an eyebrow. Although I would recommend 3 square meals a day outside these walls. Ava stood next, twisting aside to side with a childish grin on her face. As for envy, Kate passed with fine colors. Envy, I said, my voice cracking as I tried to think back on what they could possibly be. The day Xander died. She shot him an apologetic look, and he winked. You didn't let jealousy interfere with your decision. I mean, not that you were jealous, that's the point. You were fair, and you were patient with me, even though I didn't deserve it. So Xander, or whoever he was, really had been killed. Or whatever it was, because I was pretty sure gods couldn't die. I found some relief in knowing that not everything about the past 6 months had been scripted. Calliope stood next, pale and shaken, though her voice was surprisingly strong. "Wrath," she said, raising her eyes to meet mine. For a moment I thought I saw a ghost of a smile on her face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "With her decision today regarding the punishment for my actions, Kate is past." I was sure that Calliope hadn't been scripted either, which meant that not all of the tests had been decided on ahead of time. What would it have been if she hadn't tried to kill me? Either way, 5 down, 2 to go. Walter was the one to stand next. "Lust," he said, and my heart sank. He couldn't fail me for this. They had to know what Calliope had done. "You engaged in lustful relations with our brother, an act that is strictly forbidden before the council makes a decision and a marriage occurs." He pressed his thin lips together, and suddenly it was hard to breathe. Didn't he understand that we'd been set up? There had to be a trick, a loophole, something that would make them forgive that night. "But," I started, but Walter's voice cut through mine. "I am sorry, Catherine, but for the test of lust you have failed." Failed! The word echoed endlessly in my mind. The room spun around me, and it was only my iron-tight grip on the stool that kept me from falling. My chest ached, and I felt as if the air itself was pressing in on me, making breathing impossible. This couldn't be happening. "Brother," said Henry in a strained voice, "I would like to contest the council's ruling on this." "Yes?" said Walter. I looked hopefully between them, struggling to keep myself from spiraling downward into despair. There was still a chance. "As you know, the test in question was compromised. We were both given large doses of an aphrodisiac that affects both the mind and the body, allowing for our inhibitions to be lowered. If anyone is to carry the blame for that evening, it is me." "No," said a small voice, Calliope. "It is me. I was the one who did it. I thought that if they failed a test." Walter frowned. "Yes, I am aware, but you know as well as I do that our rules are firm. No matter the circumstances, they must be followed." Henry sighed, and something inside of me broke. He looked as crushed as I felt, wearing his pain clearly, but it was the way he glanced at me that was agony. His eyes were cloudy with anguish, and already I could see him pulling away. He dared hope because of me. He'd tried because I made him, and it was my fault he looked like that. It was my fault that he was hurting so badly. "No," I blurted. "Henry doesn't deserve this. Calliope said it was her fault, and she did it on purpose. That shouldn't count. It can't count." "I am afraid it isn't up to you." Walter frowned, and against my better judgment I glared at him. "He's your brother, and if you do this, he's going to die, or fade out of existence, or whatever it is. I don't care how strict your rules are. If you love him half as much as I do, I don't understand why you don't get that this isn't fair." "It isn't always about fairness." Walter's voice was gentler than I expected, and his expression was strangely compassionate, despite evidence to the contrary. He looked at Eva, and she rolled her eyes. "We do not abide lust." "But it wasn't lust." I stupidly tried to stand, and pain exploded in my chest, but I refused to let this be the end. "I am not guilty of lust because I love him. You can accuse me of something I didn't do. Not when it means that Henry is going to die for it. Anything else, fine. Do whatever you want to me. I don't care. But don't do this to Henry," I said, tears blurring my vision. "Please, I'll do anything." "Kate," said Henry. His face was pinched and his shoulders were strained, as if he were struggling to stay put. "It's all right." "No, it's not. It's not fair." "Catherine," said Walter, "you say you will do anything, yet you do not do the one thing we ask of you." "What?" I wiped my cheeks with the sleeve of my dress. "Do you accept your failure and your consequences of it?" "No, of course not. This was a cruel joke, a mockery of justice. Henry and I finally had a shot at being happy, and now we both lost it." I couldn't look at Henry or any one of the other faces surrounding me, unable to stand seeing their disappointment. "I accept that the council has chosen to fail me, yes," I said in a choked voice, "and I understand what it means, better than they did, apparently, but I don't think it's fair that you're doing this to Henry, and if there's anything I can do to change your minds, I'll do it." Walter eyed me, and there was something so intimidating about it that I wondered if he was going to smite me or whatever it was gods did to people they didn't like. "You have failed, Catherine. There is nothing you can say that will change that fact." I blinked rapidly, struggling to pull myself together. I didn't want Henry's last memories of me to be this. Turning in my seat as much as I dared in order to face him, I managed to force out a small, "I'm sorry." He didn't meet my eye, and I couldn't blame him. I'd failed, and now he had to suffer for it. Caught between anger and despair as the room seemed to press down around me, delivering blow after crushing blow, I wished more than anything that I could turn back the clock that night in order to stop it from happening. Henry deserved much more than this, and I wasn't able to give it to him, no matter how badly I wanted to. The silence seemed to echo in the ballroom as no one said or did anything. Only seconds passed, but it felt like an hour. As bitter disappointment settled in the pit of my stomach, one rational thought came to mind. What now? A noise from behind me caught my attention. I tried to turn around to see what it was, but any movement now made my chest feel as if it were on fire. I heard the thud of a door closing, and the soft click of heels against the marble echoed through the ballroom. "Sister," said Henry, his voice full of rich golden warmth that made my pain ebb away. As I looked into the faces of the other council members, I realized they all seemed happy and relieved, and smug, I noticed, glancing at Ava. Even James seemed happy to see her. "Hello, Henry." All the air whooshed out of my lungs as her voice filled my head, chasing away my thoughts until there was nothing left but her. Forgetting the pain, I strained my neck to look at her, watching as she greeted all but Calliope with a smile and a kiss on the cheek, making her way around the circle. When she reached Henry, she stepped into his open arms. In the back of my mind, I realized I was gawking, but I couldn't stop. She separated herself from Henry and took a seat in the throne next to him, the one made of branches and vines that had previously been empty, and something inside me fell into place. "Hello, Kate," she said, and I opened and shut my mouth several times, but nothing came out. Finally, I forced myself to swallow. When I managed to speak, and it came out more of a croak. "Hi, Mom." Chapter 20, Spring. My mother looked exactly as she had in my dreams, healthy and whole, as if she'd never been sick a day in her life. But there was something about her, some indeterminable quality, that made her seem as if she were glowing from the inside, like light straining to be released. "What are you doing here?" As I asked it, I knew it was obvious. The only thing that kept me from seething was my joy at seeing her again, but even that was rapidly being replaced by confusion. "I'm sorry," she said with the same sympathetic smile I'd seen on her face 1,000 times before. "Every time I scraped my knee, every time I dragged home hours of homework and barely had time for dinner, every time a doctor had told us she'd only had months to live. In so many ways she was a stranger, but with that smile, she was still my mother. Deception was the only way you could be properly tested. I never meant to hurt you, sweetheart. Everything I've ever done was to protect you and keep you as happy as I possibly could." I knew she was telling the truth, but I couldn't help but feel the humiliation of being duped. Even if it had been for my own good, that didn't make me feel any less of an idiot for not realizing who she was. My own mother was a goddess. It wasn't something I could simply shrug and accept. "Diana," said Walter, and she stepped toward me, the white silk robe she wore moving with her as if she were submerged in water. She wasn't close enough for me to touch, but close enough for me to see that her eyes were shining. Whether it was from tears or pride or power, like Henry and his eyes were made of moonlight, I couldn't tell. For the seventh and final test, pride and humility. My mother paused and smiled. "Kate passes." I didn't understand. The ruling was over, wasn't it? Hadn't their decision already been made? I couldn't fail any of the tests. Walter himself had said it. I waited for some kind of explanation, but it didn't come. "Those who agree," said Walter. Wildly, I turned from face to face, but none of them gave any hint. Ava, Ella, even Henry, gave no sign of what was happening. One after the other, they murmured their agreement. To my surprise, Calliope, who looked so pale and miserable that I couldn't help but feel a stab of sympathy for her, also nodded. They were all saying yes, I realized. They were voting. Even though I'd slept with Henry, by some miracle I hadn't failed completely. But when the vote reached James, my breath caught in my throat, and I was sure that he would shake his head. Without meeting my eye, he too nodded. The others continued to vote, but I stared at him, and when at last he looked up, I mouthed a simple thank you. "So it has been decided," said Walter, when the vote reached him. "Catherine Winters will be granted immortality, and she will be wed to our brother to rule the underworld with him, as long as she so chooses." And then he smiled, his ancient eyes twinkling. "Welcome to the family. The session of the council is adjourned." The finality of his voice confused me, and dumbfounded, I waited as the council stood and headed toward the door. Some, Ella, Nicholas, Irene, Sophia, even Xander, squeezed my shoulder or gave me a word of encouragement as they passed. Ava grinned wildly. Others, particularly Calliope, said nothing as they left. James, too, passed by without saying a word, his shoulders hunched and his head bowed. Remembering his nod and thinking of what it must have cost him to give it, I wanted to reach out to him, but I was frozen on my stool, unable to move in all fear that this would shatter and reveal itself to be nothing but a dream. Soon only 3 of us remained, me, Henry, and my mother. She stood once the others had left, and without a word she enveloped me in her arms, hugging me gently. I rested my chin on her shoulder and buried my nose in her hair. Apples and freesia. It really was her. I don't know how long she held me, but by the time we let go of one another, my chest ached and I'd slid halfway off the stool. She helped me right myself, but it was Henry standing a few feet away from us who caught my eye. I paused and cleared my throat, hating how small my voice sounded. Was that a good thing or a bad thing? Henry sat beside me. and both he and my mother gently helped me stand. "You passed," he said. "I hope you are pleased." Pleased wasn't exactly the word for it. Confused, yes. Reeling, sure. And I wasn't going to be pleased until I understood what had happened. He said I failed, I said, wobbling on my feet. "How could I pass after I failed?" "It was the seventh test, sweetheart," said my mother. "You did not fail lust. Even if you hadn't loved him." Henry made sure we were all aware of what happened. "That was the only way the council had to test you on your pride. In accepting your failure, despite wanting to stay, and in respecting the council's decision, you showed humility. And by showing humility, you passed the final test," said Henry. "So I stopped hating that I felt slow and stupid, but it felt too good to be true." "What does that mean?" "What's going to happen now?" Henry cleared his throat. "It means, if you agree, we will be married at sunset." Married at sunset. But it felt like a far-fetched fantasy hours ago, now pressed against me, an impending reality that was hurtling toward me faster than I could run away. Not that I was running. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? Not to be anyone's wife, but to give Henry a chance, to give him the same hope I'd wanted for myself. And now with my mother here, even if she wasn't exactly the same, we'd both won, hadn't we? No, not all of us. Calliope hadn't won, and neither had James. In order for Henry to be alive and happy, in order for me to have my mother back, they had to lose. Calliope had brought it on herself. But James, what had he given up for me to have this? With a start, I realized both Henry and my mother were staring at me. We'd somehow made it across the ballroom, and now we were stopped between the heavy double doors that were opened wide enough for the three of us to exit. "Yes, of course," I said, my face reddening. "I'm sorry, I wasn't hesitating, I was just thinking, and of course I still want to do this." It wasn't until Henry relaxed that I noticed how tense he'd grown. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, his relief plain in his voice. "May I ask what it was you were thinking of?" I didn't want to tell him that I was worried about James, in case it was still a sore spot for him. So instead I asked the question that had been burning in my mind ever since Ava had walked through those doors. Was it all a setup? There was an awkward silence, and this time I saw Henry and my mother exchanging looks, as if they needed to communicate was a glance. It wasn't so impossible, really, and I bit the inside of my cheek, irritated they weren't sharing. "Yes and no," said my mother. We continued slowly down the hallway, each step more painful than the last, but my injuries were the least of my concerns. After the decades Henry spent searching for a new queen, when it became apparent his search wasn't yielding the results we needed, I was going to give up, said Henry. Each girl failed before they'd begun, or if they showed any promise at all, they turned up dead. We know what was happening now, but I cannot tell you how heart-wrenching it was to watch those young women die. Knowing it was my fault, I could not bring myself to put anyone else in such danger, and I was determined it would end. And I was just as determined that he'd try until we had no more time left, said my mother. So we compromised. Persephone, something in her expression changed, and for the briefest of moments I saw shame. Persephone was my daughter, your sister. It's my fault she was never happy, and because of that, Henry was never happy either. It wasn't your fault, said Henry, with quiet fierceness. It was no one's fault but my own. I am the one who could not make her happy, and I am the one who pushed you together to begin with, said my mother. Don't argue with me, Henry, I mean it. He fell silent, even though I saw the barest hint of a smile. As I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted, she ran her fingers through my hair, and I knew she didn't mean any of the sharpness in her voice. You always had a choice, sweetheart, if you didn't want to do this. We would have all accepted and proceeded without you. You have always been in control of your life. All we did was offer you the opportunity. My throat tightened as I imagined what might have happened if I hadn't. Why didn't you tell me before? It would have given you an unfair advantage, said my mother. It needed to be your decision, not one I influenced you to make, or one that you automatically rejected because you knew what you were getting into. Besides, she added gently, even if I'd told you, would you really believe me? Of course not. And when I left for the real world, who would possibly believe me if I told them how I spent my winters? Nobody sane, I was sure of it. Does Eden even exist? Everyone here, even Ava and Dylan, was that part of giving me a choice? Eden does not exist outside of the few weeks you occupied it, said Henry. If you decide to go back to where the town stood, you will see nothing but trees and fields. I'm sorry for the deception. So was I. I pursed my lips, trying to come up with something to say that didn't make me sound like I was 12. Just don't do it again, all right? I looked between him and my mother. No more lies and no more holding out on me. To my surprise, my mother laughed, but it wasn't the laugh I was used to. It was a strange combination of sounds, a gurgling brook, the chirping of crickets, and somehow the first day of spring. It was incredible. Of course, she said, her voice filled with the affection that spilled through me. It made it easier to walk the next few feet. Now, before we get to your wedding, is there anything else you'd like to know? My wedding. A lump formed in my throat, and it was all I could do to speak about it. Yes, I said hoarsely. What kind of name is Diana for a goddess anyway? She laughed again, and the knot in my throat loosened. Ella was rather put out that I took her Roman name, but she did not want it, and I've always been quite fond of it. We all choose new ones throughout the years. Ones that match where and when we are, said Henry. We are most famous within Greek mythology, and that is why we are known throughout by our Greek names. But we have no real names, said my mother. We are created before our names, and we will survive long after names are needed, said Henry. My mother glanced at him. Some of us, anyhow. Her words brought an image of James crushing into my thoughts, and I tried to push it away, but he remained stubbornly in the forefront of my mind. You're really the Limpins, then? All 13, said my mother, plus Henry on a good day. He grunted, and my frown deepened as I struggled to put the pieces together. Then who's who? I mean, I know who you two are, Hades and Demeter, but everyone else? You mean to tell me you haven't figured it out already? Said Henry. I gave him a dirty look. Not all of us are omniscient, you know. Neither are we, he said, his eyes sparkling with amusement. I chewed on my lower lip and I thought about it. I could probably guess if I had to. Not all of you, though. I shook my head. Olympians. That's incredible, unspeakable. A warning would have been nice. I must have sounded bitterer than I'd intended, because my mother hugged me tighter and buried her nose in my hair. No matter what I'm called or who I am, I'm still your mother, and I love you very, very much. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She was my mother, but my mother didn't have laughter that felt like sunshine. My mother gave up her life for me, but what was left of her was cold and stiff. Not this warm, bubbly being that was so much stronger than I would ever be. Come, said Henry, apparently sensing my change in mood. We stopped in front of a pair of richly decorated doors, depicting the earth and the world below, and my breath caught in my throat. Persephone's bedroom. Henry, I said, but he shook his head and offered me nothing but a smile in return. I tugged self-consciously on the white lace of my dress, making sure that my bandages hadn't leaked. The doors opened, and instead of the shrine it has been only months before, it was an empty except for a small white arch decorated with a rainbow of daisies. Standing off to the side were 9 of the other council members, all but Calliope and James, and Walter stood underneath the arch, waiting for us. I hope it will do, said Henry. I was not sure if you wanted something more elaborate. No, I said breathlessly, this is perfect. My mother took my hand, her eyes shining with tears. That's my girl, she said, and even though I never wanted to leave her again, I knew it was time. This was my life now, and while she would always be part of it, she would no longer be the center. It was a shift I hadn't been expecting, but somehow these past 6 months had prepared me for it. I let go of her hand as she walked away to join the others. Henry led me to the archway, and as Walter spoke, I could feel every eye on us. Henry and I repeated our simple vows, and in a voice with such unshakable authority that the very stones of the manor seemed to quake, Walter proclaimed us husband and wife. Henry leaned forward to kiss me, and as he did, heat started at my lips and ran through me, leaving coolness in its wake that replaced the pain. By the time he pulled away, my body felt whole again, healed and strong in a way that it had never before. But that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the way he looked at me, as if this moment were the happiest in his long life. And deep inside of me, I knew I would never be alone again. We spent our wedding night in my suite, playing card games and making every effort to avoid mentioning what would happen the next day. It was my last night in Eden Manor for 6 months, and even though I knew I'd return, something about it felt final. Half a year was no time at all for Henry, but for me it stretched out in front of me, the end nowhere in sight. Married one day and gone the next. Somehow it didn't seem fair. I could return early if I wanted, I knew that, but my mother was adamant that I spend the first summer without Henry. The next morning we had breakfast in bed, me sitting cross-legged in my pajamas on one side and him on the other. I was allowed to eat now that it was spring again, and everything and even though I wasn't any hungrier than usual, I attacked my pancakes with unusual vigor, making a mess of myself in the process. Henry didn't seem to mind. Every now and then he leaned toward me and kissed the syrup off my lips, smirking when he saw me blush. Packing took no time at all, and much sooner than I'd anticipated. I stood facing the majority of my new family on the winding drive that led to the front gates. Once again Calliope was missing, but it was James's empty spot that made my insides twist unpleasantly. One by one I hugged them goodbye, even Graf Philip, who smelled of horses and looked like he wanted to be anywhere but the witnessing of this tear-filled display of sentimentality. Before I'd even reached her, Ava was crying, and she threw her arms around me so tightly that I thought she might never let go. "Oh, Kate, I'm going to miss you. I'm going to miss you too." No matter what had passed between us that winter, I hoped her tears meant all was forgiven and that I would see her when I came back in the fall. "One day you'll have to fill me in on everything that happened while I wasn't looking." She nodded, too choked up to speak, and with one last hug, we finally let go of each other. My mother was next. She stood serenely in the sunlight, looking as if she were glowing, and for a moment I was afraid to touch her. She fixed that for me, gathering me up in a hug and giving me a wet kiss on the cheek. "Have fun," she said warmly, but there was a glint in her eyes that made it clear she expected me to uphold our deal. I would stay away for 6 months, but this was the only summer I'd let her boss me around. Go experience mortal life before it passes you by. I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to enjoy mortal life again, knowing what was waiting for me in the autumn, but I nodded, "Love you," and I said, suddenly as choked up as Ava. My mother gazed at me, and for a long moment it felt as if we were the only two people in the world. But as quickly as it had come, the feeling vanished, and then it was Henry's turn. I didn't know what to say, so instead I wrapped my arms around him, and he embraced me. I was crying in earnest now, making a mess of what little makeup Ava had talked me into that morning. But I didn't care. "Taking care of Poco, yeah?" I said with a sniff, pulling away to wipe my eyes. "Cerberus and I both promised to do so," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "Kate, whatever is waiting for you outside that gate, remember that the summer is yours to do with what you please." His voice was strained, and he seemed to make an effort to push past it. "It is none of my business that you decide to do with that time." "I know," I said, "and I also know that the way I feel about you isn't going to change just because the seasons do. So if you don't mind too much, I'm going to stick to the vows I made." I gave him what I hoped was a reassuring smile. "You can get rid of me that easily." He managed to return it. "I cannot tell you how relieved I am to hear that, but that still does not change—" "Henry," I said firmly, "enough about that. You're stuck with me whether you like it or not, so you might as well get used to it." He hesitated, but finally he gave in. "Any time you need me, I will be at your side. You have my word." I nodded, and he pressed his lips to my forehead. It was such a chaste kiss that I wondered if he would give me a proper goodbye or not. Probably not, I realized. Not with my mother watching. "I will be waiting for you when you return," he said, "and I love you." This time I hadn't imagined it or dreamed it. He'd really said it, and not because of some test or bet or obligation, because he meant it. Something inside of me swelled, and I felt as if I was going to burst. "Love you too." With that, he braved the mess that was my face and kissed me deeply. I tried to make it linger, but he pulled away, and I knew it was time to go. I trudged down the drive, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds as I took my time, while Henry's presence behind me pulled me back, knowing I would have to leap before I could see him again, pushed me forward. This was my home now, and nothing could keep me away forever. When I reached the top of the gentle hill, the hated view of the manor from the outside world, I turned away, startled to see Henry was the only one still there. He raised his hand in return, and I forced myself to continue forward. The gate came into view, and with it a sight that made me stop in my tracks. Suddenly I understood exactly why Henry had been so adamant about reminding me that I could do what I wanted with my summers. James leaned against the same car he'd used to drive me to Eden Manor, and he wore the same humongous headphones he'd had in September. The only thing that was different was the lack of a smile on his face. I slipped out from between the gates and hesitated, not sure what to say. Wordlessly he stepped around to open the door for me, and I thanked him. But he said nothing, and it wasn't until we were driving down the gravel that I finally had the courage to talk, and even then my voice came out as a squeak. "I'm sorry," I said, my hands clasped together so tightly that my knuckles were white. "For everything. Don't be." He turned the corner, and the hedge disappeared from view. "You did what you had to, and so did Henry. So did the council. I knew it was a long shot anyway, after I met you." I pressed my lips together, not knowing what to say. I was sure he'd meant it as a compliment, but it didn't help the guilt that gnawed at me incessantly. "You'll exist for a long time, right? I mean, the world isn't going to end tomorrow." "I don't know," said James, and for a moment I heard a hint of a boy who liked to build things with fries. With Calliope on the rampage, anything is possible. Leaning back against my seat, I let myself relax. At least he was still in there somewhere. Where are we going? Someplace I think you should go before you leave for the summer, he said. When it was clear he wasn't going to give me any more details, I resigned myself to looking out of the window and trying to think of something to say that wouldn't hurt so much. Henry had been telling the truth. What had once been Main Street in Eden was now a dirt road surrounded by trees on either side, and the spot where Eden High School had stood was nothing more than a meadow. Even though I'd only been there for a few weeks, I felt a pang as we drove by. There would be no going back, not to the life I'd known as a mortal, and it was a loss I hadn't prepared to deal with. By the time we reached our destination, we'd found civilization once more. It wasn't New York City, but it was all dirt and trees either. Several small buildings clustered together to form a town near the hospital where my mother had stayed. I looked around, trying to find something familiar, but there were only small factories and churches and grocery stores. James drove past a pair of wrought iron gates, and my eyes widened as I realized where we were. I could hear the gravel on the road crunch under the tires, and he wound the car down the path slowly, coming to a stop a quarter of a mile inside. "Come on," he said, opening the door. "I want to show you something." I stepped out and stared at the cemetery that surrounded us, the headstones and statues rising out of the brown glass. Some of them were newer, the names clear and readable, while others we passed were so old and worn out that I could hardly make out any kind of engraving at all. James kept his distance, shoving his hands in his pockets as if he were afraid to touch me, and I trailed behind him, busying myself with avoiding the mud and the melting snow. He stopped in front of a fresh grave, one that was so new that there was no tombstone, just a temporary marker with a name written on the black marker. James stepped aside so I could see it, but there was no need. I knew exactly where we were. "Diana Winters," I said softly, running my shaking fingers over the letters that formed her name. "But I thought she was alive," said James, and I nodded. "As a deity, yes, but she took a mortal form to raise you, and that mortal form died 10 days ago." I was silent, wondering what he expected me to say to that. "She's still your mother," he said, "but you need to understand that things won't be the same between you now, and things won't be the same between you and Henry, or you and the rest of the council either." I bristled at that, "just like things aren't the same between you and me," I said, but instead of showing any signs of anger or frustration, James shrugged. "Somewhat different, given you're closer to both of them, but yeah, something like that." I crouched down next to the marker, running my fingers over it as I stared at the mound of dirt that held my mother's human body. I wasn't sure what to feel. Sadness was unavoidable, but there was a jumble of other emotions I didn't fully understand. Relief, maybe, that her battle had ended. Fear of this new reality I faced and the truths I had learned while she was wasting away in a hospital bed, but most of all I felt a follow ache inside of me. And it took me several seconds to realize I missed the life we had had before we'd come to Eden, not years of sickness and pain, but the trips to Central Park, the Christmas trees, the days when I knew my best friend was only a short walk down the hall. Those were over now, and a new existence stretched out before me, blank except the faces of Henry, my mother, and the rest of the council. "I know it's the end," I said, placing a hand on the raised dirt. "I've known that for a long time." "No, it's not," said James, moving to stand beside me. "It's the beginning. We stay there until the cold seeped into my clothes and the fog clung to my hair, leaving me chilled and damp." I accepted his hand as he tried to help me up, and I touched the marker one last time, proof of my humanity and brief existence in a world where all things died. At last, with a heavy heart, I lowered myself away. "So what are you going to do during the summer?" said James, as we walked to the car. Even though it was an obvious attempt to lighten the mood, it took me several moments to reply, and my mind was too clouded with the thoughts of my mother. I felt anchored to her grave, but with each step I took, the weight became a little easier to bear. It would never go away completely, I knew that, but at least I was sure that one day I would be able to accept it. "I don't know," I said, and I stared at the muddy ground. As I entertained the possibilities laid out before me, I could go back to New York City, but there was nothing for me there. I could stay in Eden with the trees, but I figured that would get boring after the first month or so. Maybe try some authentic Greek food. I've never been to Greece, you know. "Greece," said James, and there was an emptiness in his voice that ate at me. "It's nice in the summer." Tentatively, I reached out to slip my arm into his, and he didn't move away. "Do you want to come?" His eyes widened. "Really?" "Of course." I grinned with effort, but that didn't make it any less real. "I don't want to go to Greece on my own, and I can't imagine a better tour guide than one of the best friends." Slowly, a smile spread across his face, and there was a hint of a distance in his eyes I couldn't completely ignore. "I'd really like that." The gravel crunched underneath our feet as we reached the car, and he opened the door for me, the silence between us now comfortable instead of tense and ugly. I sat down and relaxed against the seat as he slid behind the wheel. There was a lingering doubt in the back of my mind as I smiled at him and saw that look in his eyes again, but I pushed it away. Things weren't anywhere near perfect, but no matter what happened, at least I had my friend back. As we drove away, I twisted around to see my mother's grave, dark against the remaining piles of white snow. James was right. This wasn't an ending. It was the beginning my mother had wanted for me, and the beginning I'd wanted for myself all along. I may not have planned on living forever, but now that I was going to make the most of every moment. Guide of gods: Zeus, Walter; Hera, Calliope; Poseidon, Philip; Demeter, Diana; Hades, Henry; Hestia, Sophia; Ares, Dylan; Aphrodite, Ava; Hermes, James; Athena, Irene; Apollo, Theo. That one's kind of obvious. Artemis, Ella; Hephaestus, Nicholas; Dionysius, Xander. Acknowledgements. In one way or another, everyone who has ever been a significant part of my life has helped me down this path, and I'm grateful for everything. I'd like to acknowledge the following people in particular. Okay. Then it goes through like her editors and stuff. I always feel weird reading that kind of thing out loud, you know? Okay. I think I'm going to stop it at Goddess Interrupted. We can read the sequel another time. It has about the same amount of chapters, 18 chapters for that one. Okay. I'm going to power off the nook. Thank you for listening. Oh. Huh. Wait, were there freezes? Is it frozen? It looks fine from here. Go for a Green Hills tea. Yeah, I'll probably have something. Earlier I had a mint shake. With ice. And powdered milk. And some water. And mint syrup. And it was good. I don't know why my shoulder's bothering. So I think I'm going to have like some coffee, maybe. I might go drink some coffee. Yeah. Thank you for listening. I think I might need to rest my arm or something. I don't know what's wrong with it. Anyway, thank you for listening. Gummy bears would be nice, yeah. I'm going to end the stream now. Thank you for listening. Hope you have a good night. It would be cool to do a stream like the like the streams a few weeks ago and play something like S Club or something, but I don't know if that's possible. Um, but anyway. Have a good night. Bye for now. I'll probably read more of, like, I'll probably start reading the sequel of that tomorrow. It's 4 books, I think. Bye.